Welcome to episode 112 of the Coast to Coast AFL podcast. Nick and Blaze. I am Blaze, your host, and in this one, it's a bit of an awkward round this week. 7 games. Obviously, the biggest one being the Showdown, as well as a massive Thursday night clash, which we will talk about. But they're probably the two big games to note. But otherwise, it was very kind of average sort of games around the league this week. But we have a bunch of things to talk about, and we will get straight into it. How are you doing, Mr. Cyrek?
Not too bad, not too bad. Yeah, as I said, it wasn't interesting in terms of the football. Obviously, there was one result two results I think that really stood out. But as I said, I didn't actually watch as much football this week as well. I forgot what I was doing Saturday, but I think it was more just like, I started each game and none of them looked like they were going to be that interesting. I was like, well, I thought that the Showdown might have been a possible blowout, so I was like, I'm going to sit through it. I don't want to, be sick of football and also force myself to watch the Showdown. But, no, that actually brought my dopamine levels up, so that was good to see. And, went with my family to see the Gold Coast vs Freo. We were on the third stand bleachers, so we were actually covered from the rain. It's one of the advantages of being on the upper levels. I actually think the upper levels are probably actually better than the second level. You get a really nice view of everything. It's just a bit of a walk up, a bit of a pain to get to. But yeah, so fortunately, it wasn't really raining. It was just a pretty boring game. And as always with Optus, it's a bit annoying to get out of. If you take the train, you sort of get snaked out of there. They don't trust Perth residents not to just flood to the stairs and push over all the kiddies. They make us they herd us like cattle to the train station, and it's always awkward. But yeah, so it was a weird one where all the Freo fans were happy, but it wasn't electric. You know what I mean? It was yeah, we won, but also man, that game was a slog.
Yeah, no, I feel that. I was obviously at Collingwood and Richmond on the Saturday, and it was very, very similar vibes. I appreciate that Richmond put up a fair, decent fight for at least 3 quarters once again. But again, it was it was a bit of a slog of a game at the same time. We were up on level 4, because it's an away game. So they all look like ants from up there. But it's still a good time. I can't complain too much.
It was nice to see my family, and it was my cousin's first game of football too, which is, for better or for worse. I think she enjoyed catching up. She was like, you know what, I find football boring, so it doesn't really matter that the match was on site. It's just as long as you have someone to talk to, it's always been nice.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Before we jump into the games for the week, we're gonna pivot over to some AFLW news. Specifically about the Australia versus Ireland game that is set to be played in August. We're going to run through the teams representing both Australia and Ireland, as well as coaches, assistant coaches, etc. And just highlight how cool it is that we're getting something like this again. Because I know obviously the men's had the International Rule Series with Ireland many a year ago now at this point. There are some conversations that they want to bring it back. I don't know how far down the pipeline that would be, but it's really cool that we're still getting some sort of interesting international series. Especially considering there are so many Irish players in the AFLW.
Oh yeah, this is probably the most even international game you could have when it comes to Australian rules football. And as I said, I think there'll be a fair bit of pride rivalry. We all know that the Irish women in the AFLW are obviously very proud, coming over here, and often, you hear them say, it's there's so many talented women's going around, they would love a chance to have a crack at the Aussies, as they say. And obviously in the 2000s, it was known for a bit of a argy-bargy. It got pretty ugly at times, honestly. I could see why they sort of cracked down on some of the stuff going on. So hopefully this might be recapturing some of the the spirit, but in a way that's a bit more less people just ragging on each other and more competition about
Yeah,
who can be the best
I think this is
team.
going to be a lot more friendly competition rather than this bit of the scrap housing that the men's love to get into.
Oh, if you've seen the Irish in the interview, they probably one of the biggest smack talkers in the AFLW. So look, as I said, they might not be full of biff, but I definitely think there's a few match-long conversations that might go on between some of the players.
Oh, for sure. So I'm gonna run through the Australian team, starting with their coach Darren Crocker, who is currently coach for North Melbourne. With assistant coaches Daisy Pearce, obviously coach over at West Coast, Ben Brown, who's the head of AFLW development for Essendon, Courtney Cramey, who is an Adelaide assistant, and Tanya Hetherington, who is an assistant at Sydney. Chair of selectors is Debbie Lee, and football operations is Michael Cohen, coming out of West Coast. And then that leads us
I think
over.
that's Michelle Cohen, by the way.
Oh, that is Michelle. Sorry, my apologies.
Yeah.
I am tired.
Yeah, no, it's all good.
All right, and then let's jump over to the squad, starting with Chelsea Bedell from Adelaide. Then we have Libby Birch at North Melbourne, Maeve Chaplin from Melbourne, Minnie Conti from Richmond, girl, Sophie Conway from Brisbane, Harriet Cordner from Carlton, Zippy Fish from Sydney, one of the electric players coming out of one of the more recent drafts, Jasmine Garner at North Melbourne, Maddie Gay at Essendon, Talia Gillard at Melbourne, Tyler Hanks also at Melbourne, Courtney Hodder from Brisbane, Kate Hall from Melbourne, Emma Kearney from North Melbourne, Ebony Marinoff from Adelaide, big fans of Ebony Marinoff, Ellie McKenzie also from Richmond, Chloe Malloy from Sydney, Georgie Prasparkas from Geelong, Talia Randall from North Melbourne, Ash Riddell from North Melbourne, Ella Roberts from West Coast, Matilda Scholes from Port Adelaide, Tiana Smith from St Kilda, Mim Strom from Freo, and Charlie Thomas from West Coast.
Yeah, pretty strong and well represented lineup. Obviously, it's a bit of a disappointment that GWS doesn't have a player represented in the Australia squad. I think that's the only team that doesn't. I had a look earlier and I couldn't find. Gold Coast as well.
Gold Coast, Hawthorn unrepresented either.
Yeah, of course, because Hawthorn would be on the other side. I know one of their players will be in the Irish squad, but yeah,
Yes.
no, okay. There's a few, but as I said, part of it's probably also just to keep the balance. It's easier when players have played together, so it means a lot of the Victorians are probably a bit of bias there. We all know there's always Vic bias when it comes to these things. But yeah, no. So it's a really well balanced side. Obviously, they've got probably some of the strongest forwards in the game in terms of Emma Kearney, as well as people who can take a few shots like Matilda Scholes playing backup ruck to Mim Strong, which I would imagine, as well as Talia Randall, who is known to kick a goal or two in their time. So yeah, no, it's a very, very strong midfield, very, very strong forward line. Pretty solid backline as well, as I said. As I said, no surprise, it's very well rounded. But obviously, as we know, the Irish have come up with a very strong side as well, and I will run through it now.
Go for it.
So the coach is Colin O'Riordan from Sydney. The assistant's Craig Starcevich from Brisbane, who I don't think is actually Irish, but Tar Kennelly is premiership player. Anya Tai from Fremantle, she joins the coaching panel because I think she's still injured from the ACL. So it was great to see her included in the game. And Elise Coventry as a Geelong assistant. The chair of selectors was Cora Stoughton from GWS, retired. And the football operator is Jess Berger, Collingwood head of AFLW. So we go through their squad, and starting with North Melbourne, of course, it's a Blythe Blogue. Then we've got Amy Boyle Carter from Adelaide, Kaylee Cronin from Adelaide, Nisa Dooley from Brisbane, Jen Dunn from Brisbane, Danya Finn from Carlton, Aaron Fitzpatrick from Carlton, Amy Gavin-Mangan from North Melbourne, Sinead Goldrick from Melbourne, Rachel Cairns from Geelong, Grace Kelly and Neve Kelly from Adelaide, the Kelly sisters, Tanya Kennedy from Sydney, Ola Lolly from Fremantle, Neve Martin from Hawthorn, Eileen McCarthy from Fremantle, Paris McCarthy from Sydney. I don't actually know if they're related though. Anne McDonough from Hawthorn, that's who I was talking about before.
Yes.
Neve McLaughlin from Gold Coast. Eileen Maloney from Geelong. Eilish O'Dowd from GWS. Orla Dwyer from Brisbane. Erica O'Shea from North Melbourne. Sarah Rowe, obviously if you know her from the AFL's website as well, she does a lot of the commentating and does the podcast with he's a Brisbane player, the Richmond player. I've forgotten now. But anyway,
I want to say it's like
the sisters.
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, and Vicky Wall, just to finish it off while we're...
I can picture the player, and I just can't think of the name. That's really annoying.
Yeah, it's Sarah Rowe, and she's got a very unique voice too. Anyway, it's honestly...
is it the one with I've just blanked on the last name.
Emma O'Driscoll pops on as well occasionally. It's called Tagged. I've just forgotten who the other one is. I'm going to look it up. Yeah. Sarah Hoskin.
Yes, Hosco. That's right.
Hosco. There we go.
Sorry about that, I could picture her, but I just could not think of the last name.
Yeah. So, yes, as we said, very good list. And obviously, where this is obviously going to be strong is especially in the midfield and the forward line as well. A few fair solid defenders too. A fair few I'll probably say is a bit not role player, but the I guess down and dirty sort of defenders. Very solid on their role, like a good runner halfback. And obviously the Kelly sisters from Adelaide have been pretty fun to watch. So for them to represent their side too, country, will be a fantastic one. And I'm also thankful that most of these Irish names have a bit of overlap, because I know a few, obviously, from just watching the AFLW and what you pick up. But as I said, there's that it's always the ones where you have to hear the pronunciation first. They don't quite overlap with the way we pronounce words. So it's a bit of a mouthful, but I think that's a good thing about them is, you hear, the players, you hear a bit of their story, their origins, and, as I said, even something just like the proper pronunciation of their names. You know what I mean? It's always good because, the more you get of that, the more you just sort of realize how good some of the outreach is for our game, to where we're able to put on a specific international contest, which is very hard to do with such a niche sport as Australian rules football.
Yeah, it's because it very much attributes to the fact that we have a lot of Irish expats here in Australia. Obviously, Australia and the UK have always had very strong connections in that regard. I definitely know there's been a couple of English players that have come through the system over the years, but the Irish have always kind of been at the forefront of that. So it's really good to see. Really good to see that the AFLW has fully embraced that, and I hope that down the line we'll be able to do a little bit more in regards to things like this. I know the AFL want to do a little bit of expansion into India, because of our strong connections there, alongside the big rivalries around cricket. It'll be very interesting to see
viewership growth though.
It is mostly a viewership thing, but we know that there are minor state leagues and stuff over there as well. Same within the US. Obviously, the game is slowly being grown out there. So there's hopefully some opportunities much later down the line to where we can kind of expand into a wider international rules series and kind of reach the game to an even bigger audience.
Yeah, exactly. Also, I do love the traditional Irish jerseys. I don't know why. It's simple.
I
green, like green and green.
The green just looks so good.
Yeah, I don't know. It's something that they've always... it's weird. It's not like my favorite color or anything, but like, as I said, they just make good sports jerseys. And I hate yellow, to be honest, but like, they've done a good job with the women's as well. Um, Obviously, thing being WA, I think there should be a bit of black on there, and you would probably agree as a Richmond
I
supporter.
do agree.
But the green and gold, plus a bit of stripe to differentiate it. It's nice. So yeah, hopefully, as I said, it's all well done. And fingers crossed too. There is because I know it's still in the middle of the AFL season when this game drops, but I hope the AFL does a really good job of pumping it up because yeah, as we know, when they got a bit of support around it, as we've seen with Origin, as we've seen with the AFL Indigenous All Stars match.
Yes.
They've been absolutely great exhibition games to watch, and as I said, we really look forward to it. Well, almost next month because it's almost ticked over. And yeah, as I said, hopefully, fingers crossed, fantastic game, no injuries.
That's what we're all hoping for. Okay, I just realized something about the Irish flag. Sorry, about the Irish Guernsey. Is that, do you know how on the Richmond Guernseys they have like the NIB logo? And it's like a dark green and a light green. I'm pretty sure it's the exact same colors. And it's now really throwing me off.
Yeah. Can't quite imagine it, but I can understand.
Oh, actually, you know what? My Guernseys are literally right next to me. I'm going to grab one and just kind of just show this as proof.
I'll be able to see it when we're editing the podcast, but
there we go. It just looks. Also, this is the brand new Stealth Guernsey that Richmond will be wearing against Carlton this weekend. I'm very much looking forward to it. It's a very pretty Guernsey. But that does now bring us over to our games for the week. Starting off with a big Thursday night clash. Up on the Gabba. With our reigning premiers, the Brisbane Lions, hosting the Sydney Swans. And with a 43-point margin. A lot of people thought this game was going to be a lot closer. The Brisbane won out. Brisbane look like they're getting closer to being back to their best with a 19-12-126 to 12-11-83.
Yeah, it's so weird because, as I said, they've never looked like bad, but they've definitely looked like they've been a bit vulnerable. And, we saw Sydney coming into this. They still have a few players that they want to get back. They were able to bring back Gordon, which is really good. I think it's, was it Rowbottom or Cunningham that was still out? No, it must be. No, Cunningham was back in.
I believe
no,
Rowbottom is still...
No, Rowbottom was in. Yeah, anyway.
They're missing someone.
I can't remember who. They're missing a few. Anyway. But, starting to get players back and you thought, oh, well, it might be a bit of ring rust, but, as I said, should be fairly close. But, no, Lions just look, on average, far better than the Swans. Controlled the game from pretty much early in the second quarter. Sydney got their hands on the ball enough, and it really fell short in the forward half of the field. Their forward line was not really functioning at all, and it was made worse by a injury, which we'll talk about in a bit. Beaten as well in the stoppage, it just meant that Brisbane got better access in their forward half, whilst the gap between Chadwick and Heaney and the rest of the Swans midfield was quite apparent. We've known Brisbane to, being good in the centre, but was being very up and down in terms of, the players that are contributing and all that. But I think this is the most even their inside midfield has been. Everyone pretty much contributed. Obviously, there's no, I was about to say, McCluggage, no suitcase. But, Dunkley, Ashcroft, because both the Ashcrofts are in the centre now, taking a few centre bounces, as well as Lockie Neal, all had pretty fantastic games. But yeah, so, it would be similar marks inside 50s and entries, but the Lions tolls got involved very well. And it was actually the lack of back half marking that meant the Lions would get a lot more opportunities with 19 general shot plays to 8 for Sydney. As I said, the Lions just swept up most of Sydney's entrance. There wasn't much cohesion between midfield and forward line. Goulden being a bit raw lowered Sydney's outside movement a bit, which didn't help overall. But the massive kicking advantage to the Lions, who played the game by foot all day. Sydney obviously choosing to move the ball by hands, which they did, but it wasn't quite enough. But, as I said, it just meant that it was just a little bit harder for the Swans. He still offensively got things going a bit later on, but yeah, nowhere near enough to defend Brisbane's offense. Decent midfield goals even made up for a lack of forward line options for Sydney. Charlie quieted up when Marty went down with injury, so even though Marty didn't have the best game, it was preventing double teaming Charlie, which we have seen working in the past. So whilst the Swans scored enough, it was really only once the Lions put the foot off the brakes. And yeah, the Swans just had a bit of ballast. A few players just not really doing that much. And, they've lost a step against Freo for the minor premiership. They were just, it just wasn't quite there. It wasn't terrible, but at the same time, they didn't really ever look like they were going to take it up to Brisbane.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because, Sydney currently sitting second on the ladder. They were kind of the only team to really be able to contend with Fremantle for the minor premiership. Now that looks pretty much all but gone, as Freo notch another win in their stride. But this was they still kicked 83 points. It's still a reasonable scoreline. It's not what we expect from Sydney, because we expect them to be better than this. We expect them to be closer to a team like the Lions. Again, they're sitting top 2 for a reason. But after as we've seen in previous years, the Lions have a really bad first half of the season, and then suddenly they come good. I know we were very much kind of like, when is it going to happen? When is it going to happen? Is it ever going to happen? I think it's finally arrived that the Lions have finally figured out their issues. And whilst they're not perfect, the fact that they've got Dunkley now firing, Lockie Neal, despite the off-season issues, is continuing to outperform himself. You've got both the Ashcrofts in there, and whilst they're still missing McCluggage, it's like they haven't lost a step at all in terms of like what their midfield is actually able to produce.
Yeah, because as I said, it's still hard to judge because, obviously the 2 games before this, they got back on the winnings track, but they're versing Gold Coast, which is horrendously out of form, and Richmond, who is Richmond.
We competed for 2.5, to be fair.
Yeah. So, as I said, they've got Geelong next week, but then it's a pretty reasonable run home, I would say. The biggest challenge being Hawthorn after that. So, as I said, it's set up for the Lions to finish strongly. Again, top 4 will really depend on the 2 games with Geelong and Hawthorn, but this win definitely skews that top 4 chance to more favourable than not. So, especially with another result that happened at the end of the day. But, with Sydney, it's like, again, you don't want to say, give them excuse of injuries, because otherwise they've been fairly, reasonable. Obviously, Tom McCartan. Now, I figure I've looked it up. Was the other one that came in, as well as Errol Goulden.
Yes, that's right.
And Peter Adams, but I'm not really sure that overly worked out. I'm going to give Grundy a bit of break. That might help a bit later. And I guess with Marty going down, he wasn't ever going to take the second hit out, so it was probably good that they were running Laddams. But yeah, as I said, I think, just that forward structure, when things aren't going well with their tolls, what's their next step? And obviously they're very good at getting goals from their midfield. Obviously Chad Warner, in a 43-point loss, easily best on ground. Like, that was a insane performance. But just a tiny bit wasted at the end of the day because, as I said, there was not much functioning. So, it's always a credit for Sydney's midfield stepping up when needed to. But you just can't do that against the Lions when they're on song, their forward line's much more functional. Logan Morris, even when, as I said, he looks... sometimes he just has games where he's marking everything and looking dominant, and then other times he just, pops up here and there and he still gets his goals. Obviously 3 goals this game. This was just sort of one of those. Didn't appear too often in general play, but when he did, it was normally for a goal. And yeah, as I said, it was a really nice spread for Brisbane. A lot of goal kickers, but yeah, as I said, Sydney didn't provide too much defensive resistance, even with McCartan back. It was just, hard.
One thing to note for Brisbane specifically is kind of the return of their backline. Their backline has started to regain a lot of their injuries that happened very much earlier in the season, and one of the big pieces that had returned is Froggy Lester, who has spent a little bit of time on the sidelines and is now very solidly back in the side and performing fantastically.
Yeah, well, as I said, I didn't watch. As I said, I didn't really pay too much attention to which toll he picked up. But considering that none of them did particularly well, you could almost assume that he did his job. I was watching the highlights mainly of this game again. I was distracted. No, I should have said this. Okay, I might say at the end of the podcast, but yeah. So what I was doing, but that was cool. Anyway, Froggy Lester. Yeah, as I said, he just does the hard knuckle thing so others can come up. And we've been critical of Brisbane without their main distributor, and the other one who's out, obviously,
Being Zorko.
being Dane Zorko. Exactly. So, as I said, for them to, find other players to reach out. Obviously, this game, it was just a Fletcher getting a lot of the ball, distributing fairly well. They need a few players to just hard nut. Ty Gallop again is doing fantastic this year, doing that as well. And obviously we got Darcy Wilmot, who's more of the small defender. Still all right with the ball in hand, but definitely a lot more, one-on-one. Oh, sorry, not Wilmot. I always get them. Answorth, I think, is the one-on-one defender.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I believe Wilmot's more of the interceptor, but they're pretty close
Wilmot's
together.
more of the interceptor, halfback carrier. Anyway. So yeah, as I said, pretty balanced in the backline. Again, it's they're not break. They're not shut down. They're not going to be they'll probably be finish the league in 7th or 6th best defense. The way they're headed, from what I can see. So yeah, so as I said, but as I said, it's it's good. It's solid enough.
Yep. I completely agree.
Well, actually, yeah, according to AFL ratings, Wheeler ratings, which is from AFL champion data,
Yes.
Brisbane are the 14th ranked defense this season. So I said,
that's probably accurate considering how their first half went.
Yeah, exactly. They were letting a lot of scores come up. So that's what I was sort of saying is we should see that improving to probably not G6. Now, I was seeing 14th. I thought it was a bit higher than that, but probably heading towards 8th or 9th, which is all you really need in a premiership era.
Yeah.
If you can get your offense in the top 2, top 3, then all you need is a relatively good defense, and the last 3 years have proved that can still win you the premiership. Obviously, with Brisbane doing that the last couple of years,
correct,
and Sydney the year before.
Not
Sydney.
Collingwood.
Yes. No, Collingwood's defense. Geelong was the other one.
Yeah, Geelong was offense. Yeah. Anyway. We digress. On the injury side of things, you're right. Joel Amadi did go off with an injury that very much affected the game, and it looks like it is potentially an Achilles that may wipe him out
he's out for the season.
That will likely wipe him out for the rest of the season. Timeline has not been set in stone as of yet. We'll probably have more of an idea on the timeline from tomorrow when the injury lists are updated. And then on the MRO side of things, Chad Warner was fined $3,750 for tripping Charlie Cameron. I believe in the second quarter. It was a very minor incident, but because it was his second offense for tripping,
it was just one of those ones. Yeah, it was like the tackle that sort of slipped down, and he sort of just grabbed the leg-ish reflectively, wasn't it?
Something like that.
Yeah, I think I saw. Yeah. Anyway, Joel Amadi, as I said, don't underestimate how big an injury that is, because I know he's no one's massively. I doubt he'll be many Sydney players' favorite player, but Logan McDonald and Hayden McLean have just been very
average.
I wouldn't say average, because I think they've been asked to do less, but obviously with Kerno being in the team, but yeah, it's a very different role because obviously you've got Kerno, but the biggest thing about Marty was he was creating space. So whether that's McDonald, whether that's McLean, which probably more likely McDonald's a bit more of a runner. He'll be asked to do a lot more sideways running, do a lot more different stuff, sort of lead patterns, and he'll have to adjust very quickly so that Sydney doesn't lose too much shape. I honestly, I don't think you'll be asking Charlie Curnow to change his game all too much. You brought him in to sort of shape your game around him, but on the flip side, they also gave a bit up to get him. So that's going to be a bit of I don't want to say like karma, but you know what I mean. Like
It
that's
could
just
come back to bite
the
them.
other side. Yeah, it's the other side of player recruitment.
Yeah.
So a bit thinner on forward depth. We'll see how they go without him.
All right, let's jump over now to our Friday night game at the MCG, where Hawthorn hosted GWS. One of the very few occasions where the Giants will actually get to play on the hallowed turf. And with a 14-point margin, the Hawks did win out 14-12, 96 to 12-10, 82.
Yeah, this game it's had a lot of stuff going on, but it was still like disappointing for a couple of reasons. As Hawthorn wins, and this was just sort of a, by the book sort of wins. But they did, and this is like the biggest alarm bell going off at Hawthorn, so they were just losing their cool a bit against the Giants team that bought the scrap late despite being well down on the bench. For most of the night, it looked like Jai Newcomb and the midfield Hawks would just dunk on GWS with an end-line clearance count of 54 to 30 and a 56-point swing in the Hawks' favour in scores from stoppages. This was an absolute demolition. However, the entries weren't that great. And when Nick Watson went off to ice his hamstring, we hope that isn't a serious injury, but it did look at precautions at the time. The Hawks would just provide easy chop-offs for the Giants' defence. But on the flip side, without Hogan and Grzeski getting injured, Connor Brown and Cadman would both play admirably in the second half, I would say, as the Hawks' defence also dominated in the air and got the ball in dangerous areas. Cadman and Brown still were able to get the ball in dangerous areas. However, supply was just not enough. With the inside 50 being 24 behind Hawthorn, their worst differential of the season, and really left the Giants reeling in defence. If the Giants even had an average midfield, this would have been their game. And this sort of come from the Hawks, never really putting the Giants away. They got baited a bit by their pressure and their ill discipline, I thought. And it's a credit for GWS for raising the question to them. But in the end, there's a few more questions asked of their forward line structure, especially with some of the outs that they've got now. And GWS will obviously continue to try and work out what to do with their midfield without Tom Green, try and retool it because, obviously there's only so much one player coming back can do. And like GWS, they weren't a great midfield last year. So their change needs to happen this year. I don't really care about Green being out. But that being said, it was still one of the more fun games of this round. Even though all signs sort of said that Hawks had control over this match.
Well, if you look at recent history between these two teams, the Giants have always played them close, or in some cases had the wood over them. I was talking to my mate at work who's a Hawthorn supporter, and he kind of mentioned this, so I had a look at it. Like over the past 5-6 times these teams have clashed, it's always been either fairly close or GWS have actually gotten the win over them. So it's very interesting that whether it's down in Tassie, whether it's up in I think Canberra they've played a couple times, or here at the MCG, it always seems to be really close matchup between these two teams. But in Hawthorn's favour though, I was also kind of saying that there was a lot of talk in the off-season, obviously, about Merritt and whether Zach Merritt would have been that sort of difference maker that Hawks needed for this midfield. But I think a lot of that kind of hinged on whether Will Day was going to actually be able to get back on the park and be fit. But now that we see a fit Will Day in this team, I don't think Merritt is really the kind of player they need to bring in because he does so much incredible work. And I think they just need just maybe a little bit more of a role player to kind of support him more so than just another big bodied superstar midfielder.
They already have that. It's just that Connor Nash is injured at the moment. So,
There you
they've
go.
got Josh Ward playing sort of thing. I think their midfield's balanced enough. It's just how durable is Will Day going to be? Because, as I said, we've seen Jai Newcomb, as I said, when he's, going full hand contested, like he's good, but he'll also not use the ball as well. Like we've seen a lot of high Jai Newcomb possessions, not much. And again, like obviously most of us understand that he was literally carrying that midfield
Oh yeah.
without Will Day. And I'm not gonna like knock a player for doing the best that he can in that situation. But stats will tell you that he was not a good ball user. Whereas now he's getting clearances and they're linking up with dangerous play. And someone like Will Day, he doesn't even mind a handball receive himself. He's a very good user of the ball. So they both sort of complement each other. But as I said, both are capable of winning their own clearances. Obviously, Jai Newcomb almost doubled Will Day's solid 8 clearances with 15 of his own.
Oh yeah. Like it was
So,
a huge amount of clearances for Newcomb. Like he was doing
oh yeah,
so much work.
Yeah, keep in mind for perspective, the highest for the Giants was both Callanan and Green with 4. So, that's almost quadruple the amount of clearances for the GWS Giants.
Do you know what percentage Newcomb had for CBAs? Because I imagine it would have been pretty close to all of them, essentially.
It would be like 88%, I would say. Just off the top of my head, that's normally what he rocks up at. He almost doesn't miss one. Let's see. 87. So very close.
Very close. But yeah, that makes sense because I imagine the only time he probably didn't attend a CBA was when he would be on the bench.
Yeah, because otherwise Hawthorn spread it out. Like the next most is not actually Will Day, it's Josh Ward. Because Will Day sometimes goes on the wing as well. Then you got Will Day on 60. Oh, sorry, Josh Ward was 63. Lloyd Meek was 63. Obviously, he's sharing with Ned Reeves.
Yes.
And then you got Will Day 60, Cam McKenzie 57, and then like 3 or 4 players that they're sort of rotating. And obviously Nick Watson only was able to take 1 before he got injured.
Yes, I'm going to touch on that now, just whilst we're talking about it. It is hamstring tightness. They were made. It was just kind of like an awareness kind of thing. By half time. So they're just being very precautionary about it. If he misses a game, it'll probably only be 1 week, just on the safe side.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's probably a really good thing that they managed to catch it early, rather than like.
Yeah, because you saw when he went down, it was 9 day, and yeah, there's a lot of difference between like a week of preparation versus when it happens in a game. But yeah, their ground level ball use evaporated in the forward half once Nick Watson went. It's one of those situations where it probably raised a few flags how important Nick Watson is and how that's not always a good thing. Obviously, like Jai Newcomb being that central piece in the inside midfield, so he needs a bit of support there. But as I said, unless Ginnivan plays forward, which he sort of went and did that role later on, there's not that many options for Hawthorn. So
no, it is kind of
it's a bit
it
of
is
that.
kind of
They don't
really
have the
just
best
those
forward
two
depth.
that are like these
Yeah.
small forwards for them to kind of play up there. Otherwise, it's like a spattering of tall players and Jack Gunston.
Yeah, as well. They've brought in Jack Dalton, who had I think a fairly quiet first game, but did relatively well. There's a couple of goals. Oh yeah, 2 goals. So he had a decent night out. So they'll look to grow him, but yeah, there's not that many options there. You've got the Connor McDonald, Cam McKenzie sort of deal where they're both pretty decent, but pretty average ball users at times. Cam McKenzie obviously had a fairly good game. But yeah, as I said, so that'll be a bit of an issue. But, for me, again, Hawthorn, they've got a few players missing still. Obviously not enough to me to be that concerned, but it's like, well, you can understand some of their forward line issues. But to me, the biggest red flag was just the some of the intent. But they won what they needed to win.
Yep.
I wouldn't be too concerned on the long term. It's just, I would say, for the next couple of weeks, Hawthorn just look a tiny bit more vulnerable than you thought they would for their list situation and, how relatively well on the ladder they are. I think they're sort of teetering on an upset loss at some point, but, as long as you can keep it together, they've still got a pretty decent launch pad for the back half of the season as we go out the buys. And GWS, they're pretty much ruled out. Like, there's not really much you can do from there. They'll be happy if they avoid the bottom four, as some of the other teams around them are rising up.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they'll get there, but they're definitely in that sort of awkward phase with St Kilda, Port Adelaide, North Melbourne, where they're not really looking to make finals even from 10th, but they're still probably worth trying to play to their best of their ability.
Yeah.
Just to work out next year.
Yeah, they're definitely in a position where finals is probably off the cards at this point, and they're kind of just looking forward to getting the most out of the younger talents, try to grow them a little bit more so they can go into next season a lot more prepared, especially if there's a possible chance that like someone like Hogan could be out for a couple of potentially a bit longer going into the start of next season as well. So there's always just a little bit of concerns considering his age and just how his body's kind of battered and bruised from over the years.
Yeah. And I think GWS is due for a few list changes because, as I said, the biggest one obviously being like Aaliyah. Sort of once, Grzycki went down, Briggs spent a bit more time in the forward line. And Aaliyah, he'll rock, but he's just been used so sporadically and, is definitely one of those players that I think, again, one of that trade last year, I don't think there's much to say that, there's much role for him in GWS. And they have a few other players, like Connor Stone, who's the other one? Angwin, I guess.
Yeah, Ryan Angwin.
Who have, are in the team, but not quite finding their way. So, so we'll see what they do this coming year. It'll be a bit of a retooling, but as I said, I think they'll try and build that backcourt for for the next year, because as I said, there's not much to really gain out of this season.
No,
they'll appreciate some of the growth of some players. Biggest one being Gothard. But yeah, as I said, it's just nothing doing.
Completely agree. Again, back on the injury side of things, Brent Daniels went off with a calf concern, and obviously Max Krzyzewski with a knee. Reports say it's a dislocated patella, but I believe he went in for scans yesterday, and there'll be official confirmation on that probably when the injury list comes out. So he might not be ruled out for the rest of the season, but it is more likely than not he won't play another game until next year.
Well, if it's ruptured, he'll go. If it's just a some sort of bruising or something like that, where it's just inflammation, he might be able to come back again.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And then on
a bit of a coin flip.
And on the MRO side of things, Blake Hardwick was fined $1,000 for striking Toby Green. Surprisingly, not the other way around, considering Toby's reputation. But that is A-OK. Jumping over now to our Saturday games, starting with a very interesting one over at Marvel Stadium, where Carlton host the West Coast Eagles. And with a 53-point margin, Carlton continue their little winning streak with Josh Fraser, sorry. Too many Joshes in the league already. With a 17-15, 117 to 9-10, 64 scoreline.
Yeah, and I said, the interesting thing wasn't the game, because that was pretty boring, but, it was a very academic win, and, when I was looking at the stats, and, I was seeing some comments, and someone brought this up, it was such an even win, with the lowest possession getter being Bryn with 11 possessions, and he booted 3 goals himself. So, there was really not that many players not at least providing something for Carlton. with great movement off the half-back line and control of possession. There was just not much the Eagles could do. We've seen teams dismantle the Eagles just by marking, and that's really what Carlton did. But it wasn't wasteful. It wasn't junk. They, still able to bring the ball forward. And at the end of the day, they over doubled the Eagles' marks for the night. I think it was something like 160 to 80 something. I'll just double check that. 133 to 66. Wasn't quite that high, but still flocking nevertheless. Despite an even centre clearance battle, this was only because of Harley Reid, because he had 9 centre clearances, but otherwise Carlton's mids were on top of the Eagles in almost every facet. The Eagles forward line just got dunked on by a Carlton defence that in the last 5 games has the most score restrictive back line in terms of preventing score per inside 50, only behind Collingwood and just above Freo. Apart from Herbert, there was nothing really going for the hapless Eagles, and Carlton just enjoyed some flexibility as they put Ainsworth in the centre bounces to great effect, as well as rucking Harry Mackay, who maybe was just trying to make his twin brother jealous. We don't really know, but it sort of actually varied it a bit for him. So, as I said, at the end of the day, it ended a pretty competitive run for the Eagles, and I'm not going to be too upset at a 53-point loss to a hot team away from home. Especially with the understandable defensive issues, which we'll talk about in a second.
Yes.
But really, it was just the lack of system in their forward half, which was a separate issue to see and disappointing. But something that we sort of saw coming. Waterman has been horrendously out of form after a pretty decent start to the season, and they really just can't find other, avenues, because we said that it was possibly going to be one of the worst forward lines in football. Obviously, Richmond just got injured to where they've safely got that mantle, but, the Eagles would at least be in the bottom 3. It's arguable whether Essendon's up there. They're very efficient, probably a bit more efficient than the Eagles, but don't get as much supply and probably get less goals per game.
I'd say it's a fairly accurate assumption. Or actually not an assumption, it's more of an assessment of these 3 teams. But to Carlton's credit specifically for their defense, Wittering has had a setback in his return from injury, and has allowed young players like Harry Dean to step up massively in that back line. And it's insane how someone so young has been able to become such a standout defender already, because he's doing so much work down there that is very Wittering-esque, and is just and he's just really he's one of the players that is really putting Carlton on his back and really kind of bleeding for the club.
I will say, I get putting Carlton on his back and all that sort of thing, but I think that's a bit harsh, because Lockie Cohen, or maybe not, Wade Dirksen is the one I want to mention first, because he, a player that I would hazard maybe 10% of AFL supporters even knew existed before this season. Goes on Waterman, pretty much shuts him down, then switches up to Jobe Shanahan, just because they wanted a bit of mix-up, and, Jobe just basically does nothing the whole game.
Yep.
That is a massive scalp. And, obviously Cohen is a bit more of a rebounding defender, but his ball use has been pretty fantastic. I think he's someone that sort of has been brought more into the game since the departure or the change in coaching. I'm not going to blame Patrick Voss for this, but I think Cohen is one that's benefited a bit more under. What did I say?
You said Patrick Voss. I didn't know. I didn't know that he's been traveling over the Nullarbor.
Yeah, it could. Honestly, as I said, I just gallops across, coaches Carlton. There's nothing he can't do. Anyway, so yeah, he's definitely benefited under Josh Fraser at the very least. So, as I said, it's been good. And obviously Nick Haynes has probably been one of the most unsung, reliable recruits for, again, before he got traded, it'd probably be only about 30% known in the AFL sphere in terms of supporting.
And it's not like he was even bad at GWS either. He was
just a role
very
player
solid role player.
Other better role players, Like, once Himmelberg came a defender, that was pretty much it for him. But it's not like he was playing badly. He was just a tiny bit slower for the system they wanted. Probably not quite as enough height, too, because they like playing a very tall back line. But against Carlton, who already, have that one centre pillar and like getting the ground level ball, putting a bit of pressure on, he does really well. So, as I said, so it's not just the kids. Obviously, there's a bit of respect to say on Nick Haynes' leadership as the senior member there whilst he is gone. But, as I said, so, while I do I do understand what you meant by like, Harry Dean player on, on his back because, for a rookie, it's a lot to ask of him and he's doing miles above what's
If it wasn't
expected
for
of
the
him.
fact that like the Rising Star Award is very much more of a midfielder's award at this point, like I reckon he would be up there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Obviously Jagger is more likely to win the Rising Star if you're going to pick a Carlton player. But in terms of like output to average position, like Dean is way ahead. Like you just don't get that solid output from a key defender in their pretty much first year. And as I said, like Jagger Smith is fantastic. But we've seen like midfielders have really solid first years. There's others that sort of replicate that year in, year out. So, as I said, while it is like still amazing and deserves a lot of props, in terms of like what you're expected to see, I think it goes a bit underrated, like how good a year Harry Dean is having.
Yeah, absolutely. On the injury side of things, it doesn't get any much better for the Eagles, however, with Cooper Duff-Tytler going out with a calf concern. From what I've seen of reports, it is only on the minor side of things, so he might only be out for a couple of weeks, if most. But however, it does get worse for their backline, with Harry Edwards ruled out for the rest of the season due to concussion concerns after fronting the concussion panel.
Yeah, no, I mean, it just makes sense. Like, as much as Harry Edwards is important, like, you really do want to make sure that he is good to go because your future's looking. It's just too bleak. And you know what I mean? It's not like saying that, the Eagles haven't done, enough on all that. Like, it takes a fair bit of bad luck. Obviously one player retiring from concussion, and then, to have your next best, who had injuries but not concussions, then get a couple in a season, it's there's not really much you can do about that. So you have to really look long term, and the Eagles will at least want to have Harry Edwards come in support, and maybe support Rhett Bazzo, who again I've knocked at various points in this podcast as not being a real defender, but honestly, his output's pretty solid. Like, he was the best defender on this game, which is a pretty low bar, unfortunately. But, he was solid from the little bits of pieces that I watched. I watched some of the first half.
They have
I didn't really
they have pieces. They just don't have that cohesion that they really need to like tackle a lot of the better front lines in the competition.
Yeah, well, it's not just that. It's just, as I said, when they get beaten in the air, there's literally nothing they do. Like, if they don't stop an outside run, they're just losing. Like, there's no... If they can't bring the ground to ground level, they've just lost. And, that's just the fact of their list. And they do a good job of trying to, like, compete, turn every game into a game style that suits them. But Carlton just didn't have any of it, and they won as convincingly as you would want. So, yeah. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, there isn't too much else to really cover in this game. So we'll jump over to our Saturday twilight game at the MCG, where Collingwood hosted Richmond. And with a 34-point margin, despite a fairly hard-fought first half, Collingwood won out 15-16, 106 to 11-6, 72.
Yeah, and as I said, this is a strange one because it was already a case where the Tigers, the biggest issues for them was defence all night. Although their own ball use prevented some reasonable efficiency for the Tigers forward line and getting a bit more score, they overall did well and had some synergy, obviously, with just for Alja getting 3 goals and looking very solid in that forward line. McKelty Lafau still taking some while to get into it. But, as I said, Ryan Mansell gave the Tigers fans a lot of joy with a beautiful goal from the boundary and 3 on return. However, the midfield is where they got absolutely pantsed in class as Degoe, Dacos and Crisp torched the Tigers, as Prestia and Timmy T's ball use wasn't great. Timmy T made up for it with 3 goals and a pretty solid game.
So I actually had a look into this because I noticed he was having a very poor first half. He was being tagged very strongly by Ed Allen, who had a fantastic game on his own merit. But once that tag was lifted off of him and he rotated more into the forward line, is when he started to come alive in that second half. I genuinely think, like, for the first time in a while, we had a really bad second quarter, but a really good third quarter. Normally that's the other way around. So I was very pleased that we had a little bit better of a second half. But again, like, the Pies were just too strong.
Yeah, and the problem is, as I said with the tag of Timmy T, is like, there wasn't really too many other kids standing out in that middle section. Obviously, except for Rechko, who was absolutely fantastic on the wing. They just couldn't really find anyone to lift around them. And again, like I said, I don't want to knock Tim. I don't want to sound like Ken Corns, but as I said, there's been just a few games this year when his ball use drops, it tends to really deflate a lot of the team around him because, as I said, he is sort of the motor of that midfield.
He is.
And they really need a few more players just picking up a bit of the mantle.
Well, I'm very glad that we have brought Mansell back in. I'm very glad that Houghton is getting a little bit more midfield game time. I think it's really good for both of their developments. Obviously, Rechko, I'm so glad we have him. He's been so good on the wing. I'm very glad to see Sam Cummings' development do really well. He had some fairly solid moments in this game, but obviously he's still quite young. Sam Grill, same issue. But yeah, the player that I was most disappointed in was probably Vlosten. I think Vlosten had a really poor game. Whereas
intercepts were very loose when I saw him in defense. It was almost like intercept Pat statting.
His kicking resulted in so many clangers. It was really disappointing. However, I think Short played a good game. I think Broad had a fairly solid game. Miller was probably a little bit more quiet this week in comparison to other weeks. Kai Anand, he's been very solid since coming in from the mid-season draft. I'm very happy with him. So there are still some good moments and some very solid developments happening in terms of our structure and stuff. But yeah, there's still a lot to deal with, and the fact that we went into this game with no tall forwards, relying on 2 mid-sized forwards being Lafau and Olga. Again, Olga I think had a great game, so no knock on that.
Yeah.
Tom Lynch is definitely going to be really important to coming back, and he's meant to be back this week. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and look, as I said, we'll talk about the Magpies for a bit because, it was a solid enough game for the Magpies, but geez, it was top heavy as well. The players that had nights had absolutely huge nights, but as I said, some of the others Swadling just had sort of a bit of comeback game after having a really solid debut. Rowan Steele just, Harvey Harrison just sort of existed. Quainer sort of a bit down. So, it was interesting because there was a few players that, even for Collingwood, really struggled with ball use as well, produced a few clangers. Even Howe was pretty mediocre by foot, just by his kicking efficiency and all that. But, as I said, everyone did really good. And, it was all the usual subjects, so I'm not going to go too much about it. Although Lockie Schultz, he doesn't kick too many 4-baggers these days. So
he had a very solid game. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do want to mention someone because he is one of our favourites on the podcast.
Indeed he is.
Big Stack Billy Frampton. There has to be a slight reframing because this year especially, and I'm not saying Big Stack Billy for All Australian. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. I don't know. But this is not a really good year for key backs.
No, it's not.
And, he had a really solid game. Apparently he took Lafau out of the contest. And despite some low possessions, he does not turn the ball over. So, he's really, really solid as a defender. Doesn't turn the ball over. Sure, he isn't an intercept defender, but you know what I mean? It's just a lot of, I think, when you just take your opponent's best available forward, and, for Richmond, it's not that big a deal, but, and restrict them to like 0-1 goals consistently. I think that's really important to have for like a key defense. And, he doesn't have more. And, his game hasn't decreased. If anything, it's elevated because he's taken on more responsibility, and it's more apparent that I think Big Stack Billy should at least be considered as probably a top 6 key back this year.
Mm.
I'm not sure about the exact order. I even went 6 just to give myself a little leeway. But
I agree. I think he is definitely
like,
up there this year.
yeah, like I know off the top of my head, I'll probably like put maybe Barras, Aaliyah, Pierce, Brennan Cox is about the same level, I would say. I think Brennan has a bit. Actually, Brennan's ball use has increased a bit this year. I'll give him a bit of credit there, but I'd still rather take a Frampton kick, which isn't saying much. But
Yeah, I feel that.
so off the top of that, really good defense. But then as I said, Adelaide, as I said, Worrell's like maybe up there. And then you're sort of struggling. I don't think Wilkie's had that great a year. I don't think Sam Collins has had that great a year. Wiedering's been a bit injured. Otherwise, he probably would be above. But
I think Wilkie.
So, yeah,
I think Wilkie had a decent like first 6, 7, 8 sort of games, but then has definitely dropped off a little bit.
Yeah, Saints have found it very hard to balance intercepting and defensive responsibility. And Wilkie's sort of been in flux of doing both at times this year. So, as I said, regardless, we are seeing a very, maybe not one-dimensional defender, but a very much does purely the role he's able to, and they're getting the maximum amount of effort from him. So, yeah, I'll say this match wasn't that great, so I decided to dedicate a little bit to Big Stack. But I think he deserves a bit of a shout. So yeah,
yeah, I completely agree. Every time you could see him clear as day in the back line, patrolling, reading the flight of the ball really, really well when it came to contests. He was usually always the last line of defense whenever any sort of inside 50 came his way. As much as we're still very much struggling in terms of capitalizing on a lot of our inside 50s. A lot of that was because of Frampton this week. He was everywhere in that defense, and he definitely deserves a bit of the spotlight because he's done some fantastic work this year.
Yeah, and as I said, when I was talking about, actually, who was I talking about? In terms of restricting inside 50s, there was a team that I just mentioned.
Was it Adelaide? I can't remember which team this was. Was it Brisbane? Was it Hawthorn? I don't know.
What was I talking about that for?
I don't.
Maybe that's later in the podcast.
That might be later in the episode.
Yeah, it must be. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah. I don't know what I'm talking about here, but anyway, the fact is, Collingwood. Really, 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 really solid defensively, despite their loss of Howe more.
Yes.
Like I said, they've in the last 5 games have been the top defense despite missing their captain in defense, and I do think Big Stack Billy deserves a bit of credit there.
Yeah, I agree. On the injury side of things, Taj Houghton did come up with a cork quad a little bit later in the game. Only on the minor side of things, he should be all right to go either this week, or they might just give him the week just in case. But otherwise, pretty clean game, all things considered. There was a couple of spot fires, but they didn't get reported. So, all's good in the hood. But that means we are jumping over to our big Saturday night clash. The Showdown, number 60, between Port Adelaide and the Adelaide Crows. And with a 26-point margin, wouldn't you know it, the Power won out 13-19-97 to 11-5-71.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as I said, it's just been so, it was so disappointing last week, when it was bleak. They lose one of the most exciting young wingers, basically a first year, because he only debuted in round 23 last year in Ewan McKinlay. You lose one of your best defenders in Asava Radicalea, and we know Alia's quality. He's shaping for an All-Australian season, but he has been a bit iffy when he doesn't have his friend Asava in the back line. So, it's like, well, they've got triple forward line. Two tall forwards. No, it was the three this week in Adelaide, because they had Tex, Philthorpe, and Fogarty.
Yes.
However, Port were able to just smother the Crows defensively and bully them on return for the entire night, with only bad goal kicking and an impressive game by Fogarty, who pretty much was the only reason this wasn't a complete bloodbath. In normal Showdown fashion, the pressure was absolutely fantastic and on high for both teams. Lowish disposal night, as both teams were tackling above average, but early good work by Port was being undone by a few missed tackles, allowing good movement from the back half for the Crows, as well as obviously missing the goals, which they've done a fair bit this year. It's been a bit of a problem. After that, however, Port would restrict Adelaide's scoring shots, and it would lead to a blowout in general play. For Port, Butters, Jason, Horn-Francis, and Sweet all dominated the centre and led a clearance win of 20, as Josh Lai stood up in the absence of Radicalea. Not in terms of like he was playing a pure defensive role, but he was playing the intercept hunter higher, that allowed Leah to, sort of stay a bit further back, and, play a bit more defensively responsible. And between the two of them, Josh Light absolutely smothered, I think it was Ben Keys. He had pretty much no influence of the game, all the while, Josh Light was able to get a few rebounds, and obviously, Ilya just stood up. Absolutely crushed. I put Philthorpe here, but I'm pretty sure he was on Texan. He might have had a bit of both. Still getting 6 intercepts and a couple of intercept marks. On the flip side, Keane got absolutely pounced by Georgiadis. He basically had his coming back game a week delay because, as I said, he was pretty shocking this match, despite having a fantastic week last week. As the defense just sort of looked a bit middling outside of Worrell. I won't say they were terrible. I do think that their midfield let them down. But, I think I'm trying to see where I've put it. I'll talk about it a bit later. But, another thing was just, Adelaide, they were very good once they got the ball past their half-back line, in terms of transitioning that into the forward line. Like, once they reached about the, maybe 60 meters away from goal, they were pretty solid. But they did struggle a lot in that half-back line. And Port were a lot more scrappier, but they were at least efficient scoring inside 50. They had a lot of chances. That they defended the wings very well. They were able to create a few forward half turnovers. And even though it was scrap moving forward, it was a territory win basically all night. Zach Thatcher and Jones did struggle against Fogarty, but in their defense, as I said, he really did make some of the most of those bad entries by the Crows, who conversely could get the ball inside 50, as I said before, but looked nowhere near scoring, with even 16 shots looking flattering at times. Like, this was probably, we said that the Crows struggled earlier this year with their forward half link-up, especially from the back half. And then it just went back to normal. Like, it's back to there. Okay, they don't always take it, but when they do, they normally score. Whereas this is just a reversion back to that. And, partly, you might say, Port did a really good job keeping Jordan Dawson controlled, because while he was solid, this was sort of like a Jordan Dawson game where he gets a bit of ball, but not much territory and impact.
Yep.
Sort of what I sort of criticized him over the last couple of years for doing. But, again, if this is like his worst baseline game, like, that's pretty great. Like, he's had a fantastic year. I don't want to knock him too much for what was a pretty tough night for the whole team. But, as I said, it was just sort of, while Dawson was very good, like, there was no one really around him. Like, Jared Berry, like, he, again, fantastic tackling pressure, but he looked really average with ball in hand. Saligo pretty much James Peatling pretty much did nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Isaac Rankin had next to no influence. And the outside was absolutely miserable with both Curtin and Cook. Cook going from the Showdown hero to a bit of a Showdown zero in this match. He just wasn't able to do. And even Zach Taylor, who scored a couple of goals and they were very nice, really just didn't get involved enough. So, you know, I really think that Adelaide didn't really work hard enough on the outside, which was a bit of a shame because, you know, as I said, they could create some very good movement once they brought the ball up. Obviously, though, as I said, that back after wing midfield was just off without their main man, Wayne Milera.
Oh, yeah.
You know, as I said, you know, Hulk Kahan, Nankervis were pretty much okay, I thought, with ball in hand, but, you know, it sort of pressured out the contest. Again, good tackling pressure, good forward half pressure. I'm not going to knock them. Both are relatively youngish players. They're not going to, like, well, maybe Nankervis has the ability to run away from the contest, but none of them are going to barge through. Laird, I thought, was very vanilla. Some of his kicks were pretty just stock standard, and he faded after half times. And coming to Malkalani, we're just sort of forced to defend, and you've got to really give it a lot of credits to Richard, Berry, and Durden, who were all running around to full effect. They were absolutely lethal in Port's forward line, and it just made for a really nice game. And, you know, like last year, Port were missing a lot of defensive injuries. They put out one of the youngest teams they put out for the year and got absolutely pumped by the Crows. This year, they were able to get control and win. And I think for most Port fans, even though like I thought Finkley was fine, like I knew it was time to change coach. I said that numerous times on the podcast.
You have.
But in terms of like the difference between last year and this year, even though the wins aren't changing, it's how competitive Port are and how unwilling they are to let a contest get away from them. And, you know, like I must admit, in a showdown, it's probably like the extra edge to actually get the win. But like, you know, as I said, they had every excuse not to get this win, and they still managed to do it. And, you know, as average as the Crows were, Port just as much made them average, which was fantastic to see. They didn't just like take advantage of a Crow side that was, you know, pretty air. You know, they actually punished. And again, if they actually scored better, they would have really, really got the win on this one.
From what I saw of this game, Port were very much proactive, and a lot more proactive than they had been in recent, pretty much in, like, for the entire season, really.
Years,
this is easily one of the best games that they've played all season long. And, you know, which isn't hard to say because they've only had a handful of wins. But the point of the fact is that, like, this is the best that I've seen Port this season. Like, this is the most cohesive. Even with, you know, the loss of Radicaleer in the backline, you know, they finally figured out how to be able to make up for it. You know, with their midfield issues, they're still able to put a cohesive team together and shut down a midfield that normally is pretty competent and pretty decent in terms of how they produce. And, like, the fact that the front line, whilst we've seen them be very competitive over recent weeks, has really stood tall this week. Shows that Port are still heading in a good direction development-wise under Josh Carr. And whilst, you know, they might not get to where they really want to be, whether like this year or next year, they're heading in a very solid direction in terms of their structure. And whether Butters leaves, whether he stays, I think they'll still be able to attract talent, whether it's from the draft or from other teams, to be able to fill in those sort of missing roles and really rebuild back to a finals team.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, as I said, Zach Butters, I should mention, was the Showdown medalist. He had an absolutely fantastic game. I'll go through his stats quickly. He basically had 37 possessions, 21 pressure acts, 11 inside 50s, 23 contested possessions, 12 ground ball gets, 6 intercepts, 13 clearances, and behind. I thought he kicked a goal, but no. And 9 score involvements as well. So,
absolute monster performance from him. Like, he's just continuing to rank in the money in terms of what his contract's going to be worth.
Yeah. Funnily enough, though, only the second highest player rated on Champion Data, and the other one was Fogarty, who I don't think was like probably as good as Butters, all thing considered. I think sometimes Champion Data rates an efficient forward, so
it very much
but at the same
skews
time,
it more towards like goals
Yeah.
and score involvements and goal assists more so than I feel like just pure
Yeah.
like midfield statistics.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it counts good goal shooting as bowl use, which is fair, but it sort of like doubles up on points almost.
Yeah.
But the main thing I'm trying to say with this is that although, Zach Butters had an absolutely fantastic night, I do want to say, like, Fogarty in a losing team and a team that didn't even look close, it was very telling that he was even. Actually, I couldn't tell. He got coaches' votes. I don't know if he got a Showdown medal vote, but he deserved to. Um, but anyway, yeah, in terms of Butters, as I said, I think most Port fans, I think, honestly, it's probably one of the most surprisingly mature and reasonable situations. Like, and it's credit to his agency because, like, even though there's like always a few news pieces like every couple of weeks saying, oh, definite, they've been pretty consistent of hiding obviously any meetings that they have with any other clubs or rivalries. Like, on paper, you almost take on face value that, he's really just considering this at the end of the year. And maybe that's true. Maybe he said, oh, agent, look for the best deals for me, but I'm only going to sit down for it come the end of the season. And if that is the case, I respect him a lot. That being said, there's a fair chance there's also had a few meetings. But you cannot deny that every time he goes out there, he does the best thing for his club. And he puts his body on the line. Like, he's not preserving himself for a contract. Like, he is, dead set, always in the contest, and he just bleeds whatever club he plays for. And,
Absolutely.
he's going to be a solid player for wherever he goes. But, he's definitely leaving nothing on the table for Port. And, if we somehow manage to retain him, it will be a miracle, as I said. And it would be absolutely fantastic news. But, as I said, at least we've seen some signs of structure outside of that. And with, again, with Joe Richards taking a few more midfield time, Joe Berry even taking a few centre bounces, at least we are trying to see what happens when we move him around a bit. Yeah, as I said.
I think he just loves to play footy more than anything. Like,
absolutely.
And he will absolutely do everything that he can to get the best outcome. Whether it's not just on an individualistic scale, because he's a fantastic individual player, but for the team itself, whether it's Port, whether it's the Western Bulldogs, Richmond, whoever gets him.
Yeah,
like
he's. I don't know if he doesn't go to the Bulldogs.
I
don't know. It's just too much of a Bulldogs.
I don't think the Dogs need him, if I'm honest. I get, like, in terms of what we know kind of about, like, his family and a bit of his personal life, it makes a lot of sense to be based out in the West, more so than on the east side of Melbourne. But I don't know if the Dogs are really the right team for him. And I'm sure we'll talk about this probably a little bit later.
Only Victorian would be like, oh, there's a massive difference between the West and East side of
because
Melbourne.
There is, but that's not the point. The point is, like, you look at the Dogs' midfield.
It's like a 30-minute walk across town. Come on. Talking about WA where you...
Yeah, I know, I get it. But it's more the point of the fact that, like, you look at the Dogs' midfield, and I don't know if he necessarily needs to slide into that right now. Granted, Treloar probably going to retire. Libba probably maybe one more year in him. Who knows? The Bonds probably only got like 2 or 3 years left. But they've still got Kennedy as well. And they've got a couple of like up and coming players.
Playing forward though.
Yeah, I think they much prefer him rotating forward. But like is Butters going to be the right sort of player to fit into that midfield if players retire?
Yeah, I don't know.
Or is he better off going to like a North, not necessarily a North Melbourne, but like one of these younger midfield sort of teams and elevate them to be more of a premiership threat? Not North specifically, but like that sort of structure kind of thing.
Yeah, as I said, it is what it is at the end of the day. And as I said, I don't want to be too much like trade radio and like dissect every possible scenario. But, as I said, it's one of those things where I'd hate for him to, like, you just want to see him succeed, really. Like I said, even as a Port fan, like, I can't imagine booing him if he ever came over. Obviously, I'll be in WA, so it'll be a bit weird anyway. But you know what I mean? It's just like I can't even see Port fans really booing him.
He's
I'd imagine it would be like what's his name? Jackson Trengove, who, sort of had that where he left, but everyone really respected him.
I think him and Rosie are gonna be one of those two players that like people just want to see win a premiership. Because there's been
Yeah.
so many players over the decades who have been such fantastic players for the AFL.
Mm.
You look at your Pavliches, your Matthew Richardsons, etc., etc. And like, there's such great
Yeah.
players, but never got the ultimate prize. And I hope that these two do end up getting there, even if it means it isn't directly at Port Adelaide.
Yeah, because it's like I've never seen such a pest of a player be so universally loved too. Like really, like he goes around like, towing the line, and yet, he's still like, oh, you
It's it's
scruffy little
it's just,
thing.
it's just the way that he goes about it, in terms of
Yeah.
like his actual skill set. Anyway, I did find the Showdown medal votes, and Zach Butters did indeed pull a perfect round of voting,
Yeah.
with 15 votes
No
total.
surprise.
Jason Horn-Francis on with 9, Jordan Sweet with 5, and Mitch Georgiadis with 1. The votes came from Chad Corns, with Butters getting 3, Horn-Francis 2, Georgiadis 1. Mark Rashudo, Butters 3, Horn-Francis 2, Jordan Sweet 1. Simeon Thomas Wilson from The Advertiser, Butters 3, Jordan Sweet 2, Horn-Francis 1. Dom Cassisi from Triple M, Zach Butters 3, Horn-Francis 2, Jordan Sweet 1. And Scott Camporelli, Zach Butters 3, Horn-Francis 2, and Jordan Sweet 1.
Yeah, fair enough. As I said, but yeah, as I said, I do think, as I said, for how bad Adelaide's entries were, I do want to give a lot of credit to Fogarty, who has had a bit of a middling season. But as I said, talking about too, I don't know if you listened to the commentary of that game, but
I was
Ruin
sleeping, so
Hinkley,
I definitely did not.
Ruin Hinkley, they're just as much as you think it would be like terrible for them to like commentate a showdown, like. I do think that because obviously, like, this is going to be like a Port-centric game anyway. Like, I think their commentary is actually better when it's like a showdown versus regular season because, like,
They provide a
they
lot of
are
insights
funny.
to the teams, more so
Yeah.
than like against any other sort of team in the comp, because they
It's
have
like one of
those,
those ones.
yeah, like internal
Yeah. They
connections.
don't mind the insight. They can give a bit of banter to each other because, like, you say what you want about Ree, but he can actually take a joke pretty well. Hinkley as well. Like he doesn't take anything too serious, but he's more likely to have a few more jabs. But as I said, it was just two mans that sort of love their club. Just going at it, and
Yeah.
while it is a bit biased, it's like it's a perfect game for it. Although I do think Hinkley needs to stop talking about poor players as much when it's a poor game.
Oh yeah,
Like it's a bit
you're meant to be there to do
sometimes.
the game, not just the team.
Yeah, exactly. Although absolutely adorable his scenes with Aaliyah in the room.
Yes, absolutely.
He was just like, Coach, you told me never to do post-match conferences, and here you are trying to get me in for a post-match. What's changed?
He's become a media man. It happens to us
Exactly.
all.
Happens to us all.
Before we pivot over to the Sunday games, I want to just bring up the Rising Star. However, this does mean we're pivoting back over to Thursday night's game, as Ty Gallop is the Rising Star for round 16.
I didn't know he was eligible.
Well, yeah, he only debuted last year and only played like 2 or 3 games, so it's not too
Oh, it was
surprising.
only 2 or 3, wasn't it?
Yeah, one of them being a grand final, but that's besides the point.
Yeah. I mean, as I said, like he's really deserved it. As I said, he's just again, we talk about Carlton's defense making shift for some big losses. Ty Gallup's had to fill in a lot of holes for Brisbane, and as I said, while Brisbane's defense hasn't been always fantastic this year, you can't really blame Ty Gallop, and he's consistently become a reliable stopgap to a pretty solid defender down there, to where you're not really questioning him in the 22 in any given week.
No, like he's very much found his own position very, very well. Down back, obviously he is a player that can also float forward, if needs arise. But since he's been since he's kind of solidified himself down into that back line, he's been very, very dependable and been able to bounce off very well off of the younger players like Wilmot and like Answorth. and hasn't had to, and has been definitely learned a lot, I imagine, from the veteran talents as well, like Harris Andrews, like Zorko, like Lester, Gardner. Like I'm sure,
Pat Payne.
yeah,
Yeah.
he's definitely got some incredible players around him, and yeah, and it's really good that he's being recognized under the Rising Star, and because he's just been so consistent.
Yeah, exactly. So, as I said, it's yeah, really good to see. However, talking about probably stuff that isn't good to see, shall we move on to the Sunday games where we did not really have a particularly high level of football being played, it's fair to be say.
Correct. We're going to start over at Marvel Stadium, where North Melbourne hosted the Bombers, and the 14-point margin. This game surprisingly a lot closer than it probably should have been. North did win out though, 10-19-79 to 9-11-65, despite the fact that Nick Larkey was very much kicking North out of this game.
Yes, and I thought that the sequel was just as unaspiring as the original, as North trudged through this game, trying to beat up a pretty inept Don side in a low-pressure skill contest. North had nearly unstoppable ball movement from three quarters, but as you mentioned, butchered it in their forward line. Lucky having an absolute nightmare in front of goals, let them off the hook. I think I had a look at his stats, and I think he left, according to X score, I think 25 points on the board or something ridiculous. No, okay, not that.
He had. I'm pretty sure he had like
14,
six set shots.
He should have scored
like
25 points.
Yeah,
he should have scored 25 points. He scored 6 plus 5, which is 11, which is 14 different. And unfortunately, he was not the only one to miss in this game.
Correct.
However, on the flip side, like, Essendon weren't exactly taking their chances, but the few players that were standing up did so in a really big way. And I'm talking about Sam Durham. He probably had his best game of the season. Kicked a couple of really nice goals. Really grunted in the midfield. And as I said, we've said in past years that it's very rare for Zach Merritt not to be the best midfielder. But I think far and away, from what I saw of the highlights, what I saw of the all that Durham, was by far and away the best.
Yeah,
and,
I completely agree.
There's been a few cases where Merritt hasn't been it. I know a lot of talk about his contract and all that, and Essendon are tinkering with his position, but as I said, it's sort of become a bit uninspiring. After starting the season really well, so yeah,
as much as
interesting,
as much as I want to give a lot of praise to North, I want to highlight a lot of Essendon's younger players because despite the scoreline, despite just how bad Essendon kind of are in general, I think a lot of the younger players are very much standing up. I know you'll mention him in a little bit, but Nate Caddy, I thought had a very solid game. Sullivan Roby looks good. Al Akhtar, who's one of the younger players playing up forward, I think had a really solid game. Despite him playing only like 2 or 3 games so far this season. I think Kako, whilst he missed some pretty easy marks, I think he did a lot of decent work around the ground. Jai Farrow's having a fantastic season. They have, and of course, obviously Durham. He's doing so much good work since he came back from injury. Whilst Essendon are just not it right now in terms of being like a decent, competent team, they definitely have some really solid kids coming up through their system. And it's just about, getting the game time experience into them and like kind of developing a system and a core around them.
Sam Durham's only 24. I didn't know that.
Yeah, he's quite young. He's only been in the system. He's only been in the system like 5-6 years.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just a name that I've like associated with Essendon for the last few years. So I thought it was a bit longer. But yeah, I mean, look, you're right. I think it's right-ish. I still think again, the biggest thing to me is just I'm so not sure of their system. And as I said, they did make the big call, to take Merritt out of that midfield. Because, while, Merritt hasn't been good, I didn't even realize this. He only took 4% of centre bounces this match, which is the same as a couple of weeks ago. last week he only took 43% of centre bounces. So obviously they've made the conscious decision to basically not play him in the midfield, which is interesting.
It's a call.
Because
it's definitely a call.
Yeah, because whilst Roby, came in, did a few things, like he didn't quite have the body for too many bounces. His possession was a bit average, but he still made it up with some of his other work around the ground. Kicked a nice goal too, so I'm not going to knock it. But you know what I mean. I don't think he's quite ready to just go into that midfield. So yeah, it's just very interesting. But what we will talk about on the other side is the midfield for North, who absolutely had a massive field day. And this wasn't just like junk possession. Like, I almost feel a bit bad because, Harry Sheezel, Luke Davies-Uniacke, and even Colby McKercher, we can talk about, high disposals, low score involvements. Like, they were doing their job and, they were playing as good as you want them to be. It just wasn't being finished off. They got a lot of score involvements, not many goal assists. But there probably could have been a bit more for both of them. Obviously, Harry Sheezel, I think, led the competition this week with 15. Yes, he did. One more than Nick Dacos. He had an absolutely fantastic game.
Always the bridesmaid, never the bride.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, Harry Sheezel, he had one of his best games. Again, only against Essendon, but 43 disposals at 93% disposal efficiency, while still getting 13 contested possessions. A lot of them being ground ball, but it wasn't all just free, as I said. But it was North Melbourne being able to do so much at stoppage. And while this was a close game, I can't really say it's that inspiring for Essendon. Again, I guess the best you could say was, they converted all right. Sans Archie Perkins with his 0 goes 4.
Mm-hmm.
Tough shots, mind you, but still pretty, it's still 0 goes 4. They're just, I don't know. As I said, I've seen nothing past the coaching firing that's like inspired any confidence. And, you say the kids, but, the kids are developing anyway. You know what I mean? Like, they haven't changed trajectory. If you're going to sack a coach, you want to see something different. And it's to me, it's just Essendon, but probably slightly worse or at least the same.
I was expecting a lot more out of North in this game. And it just felt like they dropped, not necessarily to Essendon's level, because they're still very much a better team, but they definitely dropped a lot in terms of their production that we've seen from them in other games throughout the season, where they've just been so much more efficient. Again,
that's just a forward line issue though. Other than that, they absolutely dominated this game. They had a really solid, as I said, the difference between this Essendon North game and the last one was again, North were more ineffective. Whereas this one, it was just their forward line, which has happened a few times this year, has just randomly fallen on its own ass. Which is a problem I wasn't expecting to have with North this year. It's one of the bigger concerns, but, as I said, in terms of outside ball movement, it was far better than what we saw last time. In terms of, I guess, defense, it was probably a tiny bit better. North still defended really well from the back half. It was really just forward half turnovers. And even then, that was Essendon capitalising fairly well. Essendon had North had far more intercepts than Essendon were able to get. So, as I said, it was maybe not far more, actually. I was reading the wrong line. It was 53-48, but there wasn't that many intercepts. Essendon just converted really well from them. So, as I said, the only thing I will say is, again, even with, the CBAs and all that, all the centre players going very well, still not that much score from stoppage. Only 3 points for North Melbourne. It continues to be a tough source for them. But, as I said, that's the only thing I'll say. I actually think this was a fine enough performance from them. As I said, I think their forward line just crapped themselves.
I really haven't had a massive look at their run home. But do you think they could make the wild card? Or do you think they'll be...
I'm not going to look at it now.
Or do you think they'll slightly fall short? Because I think they're heading in a good trajectory where that's probably the goal for the season is to make wildcard.
And yeah, it's the goal, but like they've had an easy run, so you can only imagine they'll get some harder opponents. And you know, Port Adelaide at Port, obviously the first game they got the wood over them, but that's going to be a bit tough. Collingwood at the Marvel Stadium, Melbourne at Marvel Stadium, St Kilda at Marvel Stadium, Hawthorn at UTAS, Bulldogs at Marvel, Geelong at Marvel, and Sydney at the SCG.
That is a really hard run home. For a team
because their last few opponents have been easy.
For a team that finished bottom 4 last year, like, that's a really difficult run home.
Yeah, because they've already had their easier double headers twice. They've already played West Coast twice. And they lost one of them. And they've already played Richmond twice. So
generally, the only game out of that list that I can see them like being almost a guaranteed win is maybe the St Kilda game. Otherwise, I think every other game is like very much a close loss.
Yeah.
Or close loss or an absolute thrashing.
At times. Again, it's at Marvel as well, so it's not true. Like St Kilda, don't that far away from where they want to be. But yeah, no, I don't think North are going to make finals. I will say that I'm saying it's just as likely for North to make finals as it is to make fourth last, which is a concern.
That is a concern. They're probably the team with the most ladder swing in terms of the middle of the pack teams. Like there's a possibility they could swing up to wildcard, but there is a more likelihood chance that they will drop back into the bottom 4.
Yeah, exactly. And look, it's not likely. They're at 32 points. Currently, Port Adelaide's at 20. Like, it would take pretty much a lose out, and then it would even still be like a very good bottom 8 full side. Like,
true.
Actually, no, it's actually more likely to make finals. I thought they were like 7 and 8, but they are 8 and 7. But point still stands that, again, the wins are going to be hard to come by. I'm not saying that Port are going to like easily beat him next week. There's still a chance they'll lose against them. But as I said, when Port is your easiest opponent, probably, maybe arguably St Kilda, it's not easy.
No, it's not looking good for like the last 7 games of the season for them. And it's only going to get a little bit more difficult going into this week, with George Wardlaw going out with a right knee concern. Fair chance there'll be a timeline of maybe at least 1 to 2 weeks at minimum on that. And then Mason Redmond for the Bombers went out with left knee soreness. Again, likely more precautionary than anything. Fair chance he could miss this week just in case. But otherwise, not too much coming out of this game. No MRO reports from what I've seen. Pretty clean week, all things considered, to be honest.
Yeah. I finally football was clean. all the errors were on the kicking.
Oh, if only. All right.
Yeah.
That does bring us now to our last game of the round, a Sunday clash over in the West with Fremantle and the Gold Coast Suns, a rematch of the elimination final from 2025.
Oh yeah, elimination, sorry, yeah.
And with a 51-point margin, Fremantle get their revenge and continue their win streak, 11-14-80 to 3-11-29.
Yeah, this was a sneezy game, because while Freo did what they needed to do, it really felt like they never escaped about 70% of effort. A few players are obviously excluded from this. But the damning thing is, like, Freo playing at about 70% absolutely smashed the Gold Coast Suns, who were absolutely miserable. They were at negative 10% effort. Maybe not effort, like I said. I don't think it's like they weren't trying, but they had some terrible transition and some absolutely miserable ball use. We'll start with the positives, and that's Moyle and Witts worked hard against the Jackson-Darcy duo. Which we saw again. It actually worked out pretty well. Jackson had an absolutely fantastic game, and then Darcy just had what he normally does and comes in with a few really nice hit-outs. But what was damning was that, as I said, they won the clearances, the Gold Coast Suns, but it was the junkiest of possessions. Only Nick Holman, of all people, looked damaging with his possession as Anderson Rao looked absolutely pedestrian whilst Petrarca was full on trampled over. It was shocking. Like, you know, it's weird because again, I'm going to be salty because I just had to watch this. I thought this was going to be like a bit better game. I was excited. Day out with my cuz, day out with my aunt, day out with my dad even. Like, even that, but it was just crap. And it was never exciting. And, it was just so lackluster.
Mm.
And I just can't believe it. Like, again, it might be a bit harsh, but in terms of like legitimate next season, and we've had a few stinkers, like Patrick Cripps is the one that comes to mind, but I think this is on that level of just like absolutely having a terrible crap season after a Brownlow. Like Rao has been bad, almost. Like, he's had a lot of turnovers. He hasn't had any defensive efforts, and he just doesn't get involved in scoring.
Mm-hmm.
It's wild to see. But that's not all for this game. Again, sort of on the optimistic side, I'll say the back half is where all the good stats where the Gold Coast came from. Uuland, I thought, did stand really tall against Voss until late. But it was so insipid going forward in both ball use and contest that even, an okay-ish defense, I do think they left the tolls off the chain a bit. Again, St. Collins hasn't had a really good year, is a bit of a, maybe not an understatement, but, it's definitely not been good, especially compared to what Fremantle were able to do. As I said, Walter's 2 goals was really the only highlight for the Suns, and, props to him. He got involved after getting spanked early on the Moose with absolutely no support. Did at least do a couple of things, got a couple of goals. But yeah, Freo's defense had no trouble, and most of the shots were just wide and wasteful. Even though 311 was like still inaccurate, it also, was fairly reasonable. Well, not reasonable, but like not that surprising from where they had their shots. Meanwhile, talking about players that can convert, Fast Freddy had a feast in the first quarter. 3 goals in the first 4. 3 goals in the first 4 in total, and almost outscoring the Suns as they refuse to keep him accountable on the outside. It's not just the inside midfield that's struggling. Noble played his worst game as a makeshift wingman, and Adenosol tried in his second game, but was so bad in transition that, as well as the other players there, few of them young, I'm not going to like really have a go at him, but it was still bad, where it just felt like most players were just stalling till the next ball up on the wing and junk possession for the Gold Coast midfield. Who are now on the skids. 5 losses in a row. Their forward line looks brutally sad as King can't even bail them out anymore. And the stuck reality of it is that, who's around him? An out-of-form Humphreys, Ben Long, who is horrendously out of form, so they've got no ground-level scoring. And as well, they bring Ballard back, but he just seems out of sorts in defence. And, casting away Butterick, sort of coming to haunt them now. They're not got that much defensive coverage. They've not got any forward line depth. Their midfield, they just haven't got right. They've got a bit more depth there, but, for a team that's like nearly bottom of the ladder, they've played pretty much the same midfield every week. So I don't know, like, where's this change going to come? Like, to me, this is like one of the more obvious results of the round, just because like the Suns haven't been doing anything to change, or at least nothing visible. I'm sure Hardwick's been telling them not to lose contest and be pathetic, but it's what's happening.
Yeah, I don't know how to really kind of word like what we're seeing. It feels like there isn't really like a proper descriptor for it, because like, on one hand, we've seen this team be really good, really competitive. Again, like last year, they made finals for the first time. Like, it was huge for them. But now this year, it's like they're almost the bottom 4 team all of a sudden. But like nothing has really changed except for like the inclusion of Petrarca. That's kind of it.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing you got to step back and look at last year was how much goal scoring they got from other sources aside from Ben King. And, that's what I'm saying, where, like, Ben Long is so hard to, or it's a big drop-off when Ben Long isn't playing because, again, he's just not the forward that commands that much respect. Like, he can get swings where he does really well and all that. But he doesn't spread defenses that much when he's not going well. So, like, when you look at the Gold Coast Suns defense, you're not moving because of Ben King. Like, he's even come up the field a bit more, but, like, it hasn't changed that much because once you take him up the field, there's no forward targets.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So, as I said, unless you just pray that Jed Walters gets it, but he's not the best one-on-one player. So, as I said, Jed Walter, again, he's not a person that really moves from outside that deep area. So, they've got a lot of players playing deep that just aren't getting the ball. They're not really got much link up, which, last year it was Took Miller, and Took's been fine this year. Had a pretty average-ish game, especially with ball use today, or that game, but, I'm not going to blame him. But, as I said, and, they're just missing that scoring option. And as I said, honestly, I think this year you got to cast off a bit more. I know they've lost a lot of depth, but, as I said, like, they're talking about players and moving and all that, and they can't lose everyone. Like, if they lose all of Ben King, Walter, Bailey Humphries, they're going to be pretty barren.
Yeah.
It's like, what, Leo Lombard's going to magically kick 20 goals a season. 40 goals a season, I don't think so, but... it's like, what, you bring in Ethan Reed? Like, Gold Coast are at such a pivot point where it'd be such a shame if after they make their first year of finals to go back into almost a rebuild. But, that's the reality of it. For as much as, they've been talking about, young talent and, they've had all these draft picks and yada, 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 it's just... when you don't have enough system around it, and the Gold Coast are still a young team, that's like the biggest problem. When they're not functional, you're not going to get value out of those youngsters. Those youngsters will take an extra year or two to develop. And then all of a sudden you've got a Gold Coast team who's still fairly young, getting beaten at the contest, getting beaten on the outside, and, still having problems to fill. And, it's a stark reality that, I think we just overrated their list a tiny bit. And I know that we still had relative problems. But as I said, I think it's quite clear that without a huge connection in that midfield, which is why we were led to believe that it was sustainable, because we've got such talented people there. If they don't have the system in place, they just fall apart. And, it's the stark reality of being so midfield heavy, where you look at Freo Dockers, who I also had a few doubts of their list. You can't really say any area of their field is a problem. You can't say any area of the field, doesn't have connection within each other.
Yeah.
The worst thing about them is their movement. And at least at the very worst, you can say their movement's slow and controlled. And, while it also doesn't always take it inside 50, sort of like Adelaide, when they do, very high conversion. So even their negatives have upside. Whereas Gold Coast, it's like when they're having a negative game, they absolutely stink.
Yeah, it's weird. And the forward line is especially weird because of the fact that they brought in Ugle-Hagan to be that second tall forward, proper second tall forward, to support Ben King. He's played 3 games this season and is just currently stuck in the VFL.
Yeah,
he's not injured or anything like that. He's just not on the park, and I just don't understand why. If you need some sort of radical change to at least present different options, just throw him in. Honestly, at this point, you've got nothing more to lose other than potential injury.
Oh man, it's so hard because you always want to be a bit cautious, because obviously with a name like Ugle-Hagan, I think, and this is going to be cruel, it is better for the Gold Coast, just with the way the media work, and I know there's not that much media up in the Gold Coast, but technically it's better for the Ben Humphries to have a crap year and be in the side than Ugle-Hagan.
Very true.
Ugle-Hagan, you want to probably protect a bit, but you're right, it's you know, like I get like he didn't look AFL ready when he came in before, but like it's so hard to imagine anything worse. You know what I mean? So yeah, but I don't know enough about how the VFL side is going to see, you
Yeah,
know,
I
if
haven't
he's
had a look at
doing
all
well
either,
enough to
so I
get a
got no idea.
return. But yeah, as I said, so that will be. But like that was the thing. Like Hagen was always, and that's why they only gave up a third rounder for him because Hagen always had that question mark. Like
Mm.
again, so many people were just willing to accept the upside of like Hagen playing near his best form, when the reality is he hadn't played a year. Like this isn't someone like Bailey Smith who didn't play a year, but like had maybe more upside, but you know what I mean. Like I think Bailey Smith at least came into a system that allowed him
And
to
Bailey
be
Smith was still doing a lot of physical training and stuff. Even though,
yeah
obviously he was injured for a lot of that, that's why he mostly wasn't playing. But he was still
I
doing a
think
lot of like
yeah
physical work and still doing preparation and
yeah
stuff to stay not necessarily like match fit, but fit enough to when he did eventually get to
yeah
Geelong, he didn't have to do a huge bulk of work to get back into that side.
yeah, and it was like I don't think it's any secret. Like Hagen did not come into that Gold Coast side being ready to play football.
Hmm.
Like he needed a bit of work. But as what I will say about I think we also underestimate like, and again this comes with Bailey Smith, is like he has a lot of knowledge on his own game and what makes him good. Whereas I don't think Eagle Hagen's always like a player that I've looked at and is like he should be like a really fun, creative key forward, but sometimes he looks a bit lost into trying to figure out what he's trying to do, and that was the way of the Dogs. And I think, that might also be a problem coming into the Suns if they just don't have any structure around him. Because, if he's just running around doing his own thing, with Ben King, he's, such a central player, like it's not going to work.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, we've talked a lot about the Suns. Freo, Brayshaw was absolutely fantastic. Jackson, absolutely dominated again. He's an Australian forward for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Frederick did really well. And O'Driscoll, I thought he was fantastic on the wing, especially in comparison to what the Gold Coast Suns were doing. Also, probably Judd McVee's best game, arguably as well. But yeah, as I said, like the halfback for Freo had some pretty easy days. Carl Warner as well, because, as I said, Gold Coast ball use was absolutely atrocious. So, overall, Freo, like, they did what they need to do. I think, like, in schematics, Freo were fine. They just, were a bit unclean. I think that had a bit to do with the weather.
Mm-hmm.
And, as I said, honestly, if it wasn't for Frederick, this could have been a very miserable game to watch. But, as I said, at the end of the day, Freo just did what they need to do, and this is all they need to do. They still get a lot of percentage, even though you could say, oh, they could have won by more. When you only let your opponent score 29 points, it's a lot higher percentage you gain, 80 to 29, than like a, I don't know, 120 to 60, so to speak.
Yeah.
So,
Um,
or maybe 50.
and the most interesting thing about Freo is the waffle is literally just full of AFL listed players because they have a completely healthy list.
Oh yeah, Sam Sturt's even coming back. So, is he?
Yeah, he
Maybe.
was only a test on last week's injury list, so he's
Yeah.
like the Freo list is pretty much 100% healthy, and it's
Yeah, it's
makes it so
crazy.
interesting because it means that like the players that are in the waffle have to work really hard to
Mm.
try and get a spot, and the players that are like
Yeah.
playing in the team have to make sure they don't have a bad game, otherwise their spots are up like up for grabs. Like that is how much
Like,
versatility Freo have with their options.
yeah, because like, when you talk about players who aren't, and this is normally a good sign of a premiership side, like Jeremy Sharp, again, only really one good year at Freo, but still solid. He'll find another club if he, doesn't. Like Freo will want him for depth, but he's probably going to find another opportunity. Corey Wagner, again, has played pretty fine for
He
Freo.
did just resign, so
Ghostface,
he won't be leaving for note.
but Sharp.
No, Wagner.
Oh no, Wagner's not leaving. Sorry, I'm saying like Wagner in terms of depth.
Oh, in terms of depth, yeah, yeah,
Is someone that can just really come in. do his role, and no fast positive. Bailey Banfield, I know he's not Frio's favourite player, but that's still experience coming into the side if they do get a few injuries come finals time. So you know what I mean? It's like sometimes years are your year, and everything's lining up for Fremantle. It's just, as I said, I think for most people, they're just waiting to see, like, A, securing that top two, and then just seeing, what happens with, as I said, a bit of the nerves, really, because, they're a youngish side, not that many finals tested players, so, you would excuse them for maybe underperforming. But, as I said, it would be almost amazing if they didn't make a prelim from this point.
Yeah, it'd be really embarrassing if they did indeed like go out in straight sets. But there's a lot of high going on at Flagmantle at the moment. You can definitely put a lot of respect on this team for how much work they've done this season. It's just about what can they do in finals, because it's nigh guaranteed that they'll get the double chance at this point.
Well, I would be surprised if mathematically they couldn't drop out the top 10, because it's quite a.
I think
way to go.
mathematically they
17
can't
games.
drop out of the top 10. But it's pretty much guaranteed that there's still an opportunity for them to drop out of the top 4, but it's very
guaranteed.
slim.
Yeah. Like, dropping out of the top 4 would be amazing, but they're not going to lose. I mean, if they did lose every game from here, that would just be news in for itself. It's like what, 8 games left,
7 games left.
So even if they,
oh no, 7, 8, 9. Actually, no, sorry, it is 8 games. You're right.
Yeah, it is probably impossible for them to drop out in the top 10. It's hard. It's one of those ones where you have to make the ladder results so ridiculous. But yeah. So yeah, we'll see. But yeah, again, Freo so ridiculously positioned at this point of the season.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying they're going to win the flag, but like in terms of having a season, you can build off a flag defense off the flag thing off. As I said, you just have to believe that this is as good a season as any to win a premiership.
Absolutely. And speaking of the ladder, that is where we're going to next. Now that all of the bye rounds are officially done and dusted, we can now finally see where all the teams have settled going into the last 8 weeks of the season. Starting obviously with Fremantle sitting on top, 2 games ahead of the pack on 56 points. Sydney still sitting comfortably in second on 48 points, also a game and a half ahead of the third position, which is Hawthorn, currently sitting on 42 points. Geelong rounding out the top 4 on 36 points, tied with the Brisbane Lions and the Adelaide Crows in the top 6, both on 36 as well as Melbourne and the Western Bulldogs rounding out the top 8, also on 36. What is differentiating those 5 teams is all their percentage, ranging from 120.6 to 92.8. In the top 9 is North Melbourne on 32 points, 92.2 percentage, and Collingwood rounding out the top 10 on 30 points, only half a game behind North. Going from 11th now is the Gold Coast Suns on 28, and 12th is Carlton also on 28. St Kilda dropping down to 13th on 24, and the Giants with them also on 24 and 14th. And rounding out the bottom 4 is Port Adelaide on 20, the West Coast Eagles on 16, Richmond on 8, and Essendon still with their singular win over Melbourne.
As I said, it's not quite as bad. Well, actually, no, sorry. It's just so weird. It's like, if West Coast last year, their one win was against St Kilda, who were like, not as terrible. Not as good as Melbourne, but, still surprising. And then if Essendon was their only one against Melbourne, it would just be 2 weird 1-win seasons. But, yeah, I mean, look, as petty as I am, I still hope Essendon win a game, because, yeah, their players don't deserve this much misery.
Agreed.
I do think they've set themselves in a position not to win from here ever again, but, like, again, we'll see what happens.
I completely
but anyway,
agree.
Shall we go on to the match previews, because it is a classic. It is a title defense V2 with Geelong and Brisbane.
This is going to be a very interesting game down in Geelong, so it's not on the MCG. It's not a secondary grand final rematch. Truly, going whereas the last one was up at the Gabba, of course. So it's going to be a much more hostile crowd for the Lions, being down in Geelong. So it's going to be like 90% Cats fans as per standard for those sorts of games. However, in terms of their lineups and the matchups, Geelong coming off of a bye, so they're going to be well rested. They should have a couple of injuries back. Not that there's like a huge amount that they're really missing, but I think a lot of it's just like getting some decent rest into the players that were a little bit sore. Obviously Jeremy Cameron probably being the big one. I think they're mostly pretty clean actually. I think they've only got like a handful that they're really in terms of missing, and I don't know if all of that's even like AFL level talent at this point in time.
Yeah.
But in terms of matching up into the Lions, obviously the Lions starting to finally regain a bit of their form and a bit of their structure that they haven't had since in the last time that these two teams faced. So it's definitely going to be a lot more of an interesting game. I think in terms of the Brisbane backline, I think that matches up a lot better this time around to Geelong's front line. I think the midfield battle is going to be probably the most fun part about this game. And I think that may sway into the Lions' favour. However, I think Geelong's defense has looked very good. And I think, despite the fact that, Tom Stewart, whilst he has been dealing with minor injuries here and there, I think he's still had some very solid form. And a lot of the younger players that have been roaming that backline have had a lot of really solid improvement. So I think it's good. I think this game is going to be mostly one off of like turnover and speed off of that halfback.
Yeah, and this is where I think it's very interesting because again, sort of like last Thursday's match, I think it will come down to a few of the ins and outs because Brisbane, unless there's a huge surprise, I won't get Zorko or McCluggage back. But one player I think that could change up things is Kitty Coleman on that halfback line because, as I said, when we talk about turnovers and the last few games, we've seen a lot of hunt for intercept. So, as I said, there's ample options for speed for Geelong. But, as I said, Kitty Coleman could be the sort of one player that could provide a bit of speed that, could sort of come back depending on what they want to do. Obviously, in the scheme of a season, player like Kitty Coleman, he might spend a week. But, this could be an ace in the hole for Fagan that he might want to pull the trigger on early as long as it's good for his body. Because, again, very interestingly, as you said, although Brisbane have a lot of stoppage wins, they're a very solid clearance team, get a lot of points on stoppage. Geelong are good at defending from that. So they're very good at, making a hard work for good stoppage teams. However, as I said, it's just sort of one of those things where, both teams are very threatening on the offense. Defense, as I said, we're sort of looking for Brisbane to get back. So if Brisbane can hold up, it's a fair chance that they could cause the upset, but it's just a lot of little things for Geelong, and the obvious one being is this is playing at GMBA. But if you like patterns, the last games have gone in 2005 to this year, 2005 to this year has gone Brisbane Geelong, and it could be another Brisbane win. Who knows? I'm probably going to tip Geelong though.
I think currently I'm going to lean towards Geelong. Once we get more of an idea of the ins and outs as to whether that will sway my tip. But at the moment, I think Geelong is probably the safe bet going into this game. However, our first Friday night game, maybe not as safe for the home team as one might expect. Up at the SCG, the Sydney Swans are taking on the Western Bulldogs.
All right. I didn't realise we had two Friday games, but yes. We're going to go to the Western Bulldogs and Sydney first, which should be an absolute cracker. Are they both being played at night?
Yes. Because one game is out in the West, so there's obviously a time delay on that.
Yeah, okay. Time delay?
You know what I mean.
I know what you mean.
It's an 8 p.m. game out here. It's not an 8 p.m. game out there.
Yeah, exactly. So, anyway, Sydney Western Bulldogs. Again, Sydney, they're good dealing with a few injuries. Western Bulldogs, sort of thinking about coming back. Again, being very hit or miss, but you would think that they would at least have a better showing than last time when they got absolutely spanked. I think the biggest thing for the Western Bulldogs is defense. We saw Sydney get relatively held up by Brisbane, and they'll have a lot of positive signs with not positive because no one wants to see injuries with Joel Amartey, but you know what I mean? It's a lot more of a containable prospect of just 3 tolls that are a bit more tall and lumbering, then more agile, which is what Western Bulldogs tend to struggle to defend. However, again, it's just going to be so hard for the Western Bulldogs to move the ball against Sydney. They've been better, but they're not, top 8 standard ball movers. They're just relatively good, and then they get so many points from stoppage that, that it sort of makes up for it. And even then, Sydney score more from stoppage than the Bulldogs do. So, as I said, it should be Sydney. However, I would want to see at least better than last time from the Bulldogs.
Yeah, I definitely want to see a much better performance after. Granted, the Dogs are coming off the bye this week, so hopefully that extra bit of rest is probably going to help them. However, like the game that they played the week prior, wasn't exactly their standard, even though it wasn't like the worst game that they've played either. Whereas for Sydney, like with the loss of Amartey, I think it is going to impact how that forward line operates. Again, whilst Kerno can do a lot on his own, he does need the reliance of a second tall forward to be able to take a defender away, so he doesn't get double teamed, as it ended up happening in the second half of last week's game. Or the other option, obviously, is Sydney doing what Sydney does, and that's scoring a lot more from their midfield. Again, Isaac Heaney being one of the best at doing it. So there could be more of an option there, just to kind of get the jump on the Dogs a little bit more. However, I think the Dogs' midfield does structure a little bit better. Even with the return of Goulden for the Swans, I think the Dogs are just showing a little bit more in terms of their midfield structure, at least at this present point in time. However, again, you've got players like Warner that can just absolutely rip the game open at any moment. So the Dogs are going to have to be on their best guard for that. I think the Dogs' forward line has looked fairly competent. So I don't think that'll be too much of an issue coming up against the Swans backline. However, the other way around, obviously the Dogs backline is still one of their worst parts of their game. So the Swans could very much capitalize on their backline still being a little bit undermanned.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So as I said, I think the best way for the Bulldogs is to win is just to restrict inside 50s. But it's not too many avenues where you think they would win. But again, still should be a close contest, and probably of the 2 matches, the one I would be watching as a neutral.
And as a note, because of the whole issue with St Kilda and their players using anti-LGBT slurs, etc., this is the Pride game for this year between Sydney and the Western Bulldogs. Yeah. So the Sydney obviously will be bringing out. I don't know if they're bringing out a new Pride Guernsey, or if they're going to be using one of their older ones. I don't know if the Dogs have their Prime Guernsey of their own, or if they're just be wearing their normal outfit. But this is very good. Honestly, I'm actually very excited to actually be able to watch this, because I hope we'll be able to watch night games again, and I'm very excited.
Do the Swans... Is this a chance to unveil a live Sydney mascot? Because, I don't know. I feel like Swans are a bit queer-coded. I reckon,
Well, the Swans are the ones who have started the Pride game for the AFL, so they are very much a little queer-coded.
Yeah. Maybe it's illegal, but, could you imagine, tie-dyeing a swan? A flock of them, and having them open, the game?
That would be pretty cool. I'm not going to lie, that would be pretty cool.
Swans are pretty protected, and they're probably going to, bite anyone if they think that, because they're very territorial. But would be lit.
I also want to give slight tangent, but I want to give a brief shout out to Polly from the True Bloods podcast, one of the podcasts up in New South Wales that are very much primarily focused on the Sydney Swans. They do some great work over there. Go check them out. They've been talking a lot about this round specifically, and kind of what it's meant for Sydney, and how that did end up expanding out into the AFLW as a whole round, and what that kind of means for what that should eventually hopefully mean for the men's as well. So it's some very good conversations going out over in New South Wales. But yeah, in terms of tips, Honestly, I would not. I'm very much in with the Bulldogs upset, but I also wouldn't be surprised if Sydney take this win outright.
I'd be surprised if the Bulldogs won, but yeah, no, as I said, I don't think they're completely out of it. As I said, not as much as this game coming up. With the West Coast, sorry, with a with a dangerous mascot that is allowed on the field. The old Hawker. I don't think unless they get him involved in the game, there will be too much victories for the Eagles in the bird battle as we
Yeah, I
go
think
to
in this
West
game,
Coast versus Adelaide.
a crow is going to be a lot more dangerous than an eagle.
Mm,
It's honestly there probably isn't too much we really have to say about this one. Again, Adelaide, they
no,
want to bounce back from the
again,
showdown
Adelaide.
loss. They're much better, well
They
structured.
want their forward line to produce as well
That
without,
too.
not well suited for tolls, to put it politely. The West Coast backline is. So, as I said, I do think Adelaide do operate on ground level. So again, I think West Coast have got to work on certain points in this game. It's like, okay, we'll try and be very competitive in the stoppage. We'll try and prevent, we'll use pressure to prevent a lot of outside marking. And try and put the game on their terms. But as I said, once it goes in the forward line, I don't really see how West Coast is supposed to stop Adelaide from scoring.
Yeah, I think a lot of this game I think is probably going to come from just that Eagles midfield. Again, it's been their most consistent part of their game, so pretty much the entire season. And I think a lot of that is going to be just trying to restrict Adelaide's movement out of the center. Because I don't think the Eagles' front line or their back line are going to be able to compete. At least
No.
compete as effectively as you would like to make it a more interesting game. I think a lot of it is going to be dependent on that midfield.
Yeah, exactly. Because as I said, Adelaide's defense like I said, they had a few struggles against Port, but even they weren't that. It was just more style of play against Port Adelaide. So again, against West Coast, you think that they'll just get on top and get the victory.
Yeah, you would think so. But that now brings us over to our Saturday games, starting down in Tasmania, where Hawthorn will host the Demons.
Yeah, so while Melbourne do have good recent history against Hawthorn, they are pretty much not that used to playing at UTAS. They don't play there very often, and Hawthorn are very good at UTAS, and
Yes.
especially in those blustery conditions. I think the most interesting thing to see is we've seen Melbourne scoring, when they're able to score, they're able to do good. So if this is a win bowl, maybe Melbourne actually having a bit of advantage here. Because obviously Hawthorn very hard to, a defense to work around. But blustery conditions, send it to the tolls, bring it to ground where they're a bit more vulnerable. You can see an avenue. But it's hard to play theory ball when Hawthorn are just normally so reliable in Tasmania.
Yeah, it's
You
kind
know,
kind of hard to always justify the opposing team winning when a game is played in Tassie when it's up against Hawthorn.
yeah.
If it's North, probably a little bit more leeway
Hmm.
because again they have the same amount of experience down in Tassie. But I think it's
Yeah.
kind of almost a guaranteed tip to go for Hawthorn in this one.
I don't think it's guaranteed, but I think it would be more unwise to tip Melbourne. I could see an upset, but it's just the one you shrug your shoulders to. I do think Melbourne's got a bit more chance than other teams coming up against Hawthorn at UTAS. That's all I'll say. So,
Yeah, that's
I don't
fair.
know. If you feel like tipping Melbourne off what I said, do it, and then send me some angry comments when they probably lose. But, I don't know. I don't know. But Hawthorn, I think the thing is, if their forward line, get a chance, Melbourne's defense isn't that good, so as I said, so as much as Melbourne could get some score going the other way, I think it will be a bit of a shootout. But as I said, I do think on paper Melbourne have a bit of an advantage, even though both stats and home stadiums suggest that Hawthorn should just win.
Yeah, I completely agree. But that does bring us now over to our next game being played up in Canberra at Monaca with GWS hosting Fremantle. Speaking of an unwise tip, I think it's probably fairly safe to not want to tip GWS in this matchup.
Yeah, because like you can say, oh, it's at Monaca Oval, but like Freya's actually played a fair bit at Monaca, and they've got a couple of wins there. So I don't think it's that big a problem for them. What is a big problem for the Giants is just how good Freo are at restricting back half movement, which, as we've seen, their forward half connection, they don't get it from stoppages. So Freo just shut down the back half movement for GWS. It should be good night nurse. It's as straightforward as that. But, on the flip side, I don't think Fremantle directly damage other teams from stoppage as much, or at least not comparative to where they can in other areas. Obviously, forward half stoppages are very damaging for Freo. So, like, if GWS can somehow prevent them from going inside 50 and, maybe some weird conditions at Canberra might allow that, you might see a chance. But, otherwise, it's fairly safe for Freo, but like, again, this is just sort of one of those games where like, if they drop this, I wouldn't be like alarm bells ringing, or you just sort of shrug your shoulders and be like, oh, it's a bit of a shame it ended there. But I'm sure GWS will be trying. I don't think they've been like that, like, except maybe the West Coast game. I don't think they've been that miserable, from the outset this season.
No, neither. I think they've just had like structural issues more so than anything, and and a bit of injury here and there. Again, Brent Daniels coming in and out of the side. Obviously, Jesse Hogan being out pretty much for the rest of the season. It looks like it's definitely gonna be a lot harder for them, especially coming up against the best team in the comp. But there are definitely still avenues for them to capitalize against Freo's more slower.
I think if GWS just makes this a miserable game for both teams, that has their best avenue of winning. But even then, they're going to have to like pray that the tall forwards just don't kick late goals when everything opens up. So again, I think for the first 3 quarters, if GWS just grind, make it miserable, restrict outside stopping, sacrifice some offense for defense, then they may have at least a dice roll to win. But otherwise, if any semblance of Fremantle's offense goes, I think it's not much to go off. I don't think GWS are scoring very high in this game.
No, I completely agree. But that does now bring us over to our next game on the Gold Coast, where the Gold Coast Suns will host Collingwood.
Yeah, so very interesting because, Collingwood struggle to score until they don't, as we've seen this year. And it's, they've scored a lot against mediocre sides, and Geelong have been mediocre. So, like, theoretically, Collingwood are by far the most balanced team to go into this game. However, it's one of those games where, as bad as Gold Coast have been in the stoppages, again, they do tend to score a bit more off them. And that's where, Collingwood can be a bit more, maybe not vulnerable, but compared to other areas can be a bit. So if there was a game where Gold Coast midfield lifts, it has to be this one. That being said, I'm probably going to take Collingwood because Gold Coast has been miserable.
I have no faith in that team right now whatsoever.
They have to prove my tip from here on in. And look, they can improve. They've got talent, and, a lot of these things can look a lot worse. However, as a tipper that wants to get tips right, because I got a lucky 7 last week and I'm back in our competition.
You did indeed.
I've just got to tip Collingwood. Again, pure ass because I tipped Port. Even though if I was a neutral, I wouldn't have touched that tip with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah, I know. You tipped on blind faith, and it worked out.
Yeah. I'm not, like, as much as I do have weird rules about, tipping Port and not tipping them occasionally. Like, I'm mainly always tipping them except when they're crap, or, on a Sunday on a negative 30 degree. I don't know. But, like, I'm not tipping them I'm not tipping Adelaide in a showdown. That's just not on.
Yeah, no, you can't be doing that in a showdown when you're supporting one of the teams.
Exactly. It's so even. You might as well just ride the coin flip.
Again, as we said in the preview for last week for that game, like stranger things have happened. Like it's like showdowns
Yeah,
are
as I said, like
always a weird matchup.
it tends to even up when it doesn't look like it should. So anyway, but Showdown was last week. Gold Coast with Collingwood this week. Again, I think this will be a bit closer to Collingwood. But it is Gold Coast at Gold Coast. It's not unreasonable that they would win this, despite
No.
the horrendous form they're in.
I agree. That does bring us now to our Saturday night game at the MCG, Richmond v Carlton, the traditional round one rematch. I will be at this game. I'm very excited. However, I am expecting Carlton to get 7 wins in a row this week. Again, they're just going to continue to break records under an interim coach because why not? But with the hopeful return of Tom Lynch, I think that we have a little bit more avenue this week. It'll just be about trying to be that, a little bit more clean, a little bit more cohesive out of the middle and try and get some decent inside 50s.
It's going to be a struggle to score anyway, even if Lynch comes, because I think Carlton's defense has proved themselves, and you don't even have to think about whether Wiedering's back or not. Again, I think it's just the middle in the fight. I don't think Richmond's that gonna win the clearances or anything, but I do think they can, at some level, facing Carlton is sort of the areas they like to win games. They like to win the game on ground level, as does Carlton. So, they're at least playing on the same playing field, and it's why they got so close last time. But obviously, I think Carlton have structured themselves to get a bit more back half transition, and B, be a lot more consistent with their game style to where they're not going to, choke leads like they did earlier in the season. So, you have to give it to Carlton. There's not much evidence to suggest that Richmond will win, but it would be sort of funny.
I would definitely not complain
at
all.
Rivals end the streak.
I would not complain at all if we pulled a win out of our ass in this one. But yeah, I'm very much expecting Carlton to continue their win streak and continue their very solid run of form.
Yeah.
They're definitely contending for Freo in terms of best informed team at the moment. They're probably which is it's really weird to say considering Carlton aren't even top 10. But it's such an interesting comparison right now.
As I said, they're the only other big streak, and most of the other teams have at least a loss sometime in their recent history. That being said, I don't know. Brisbane's won 3 on the trot, and they're Brisbane, so you'd probably still take them. But there's not many other teams you're putting into contention with this, along with Carlton. So as I said, Fremantle.
It's an interesting little group of companies.
Fremantle and Brisbane,
pretty much.
Maybe Sydney if they got players back, but yeah, as I said, definitely in terms of wins, it's hard to argue. Even though I do expect a loss to come sometime.
Yeah, you would theorize, especially because I do still have a couple of difficult opponents coming up. That they will probably.
And look, this run has been pretty easy. As I said, Geelong was the only massive surprise game.
Yeah.
But as I said, relative to the opponents, they were all winnable games. It's just to win all of them has been amazing. And if they do that against Richmond, whilst you still got to take a step back, take a drink of water, all the Carlton fans are saying, they're never going to lose a game ever again.
That's
not quite
big dreams. Big dreams.
You can't be upset at what happened, and honestly, their record reflects where you'd probably expect them to be at the start of the season. So
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah,
they've actually managed to even the ledger, which is really good for them.
Yeah.
All right, that brings us now to our Sunday games. Starting off at Marvel Stadium, where the Bombers will host St Kilda. St Kilda obviously coming off of a bye this week. The Bombers still kind of being the Bombers. It does make for an interesting clash, but I think St Kilda will probably. I would assume St Kilda would win this, but I know with the biggish injuries to both of their rucks from the game prior, I don't know if either of them are coming back, so that could be a bit of a concern in terms of what goes on in the middle. However, I would assume that forward structure and backline structure would probably win it out for them at the end of the day.
Did Nick Bryan get injured?
No. TDK and Rod Marshall.
Oh, okay. Sorry, both St Kilda. Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, nah. It's a weird 2 weeks in a row where technically Essendon might have the ruck advantage. Obviously, last week, having to go up against Cooper Trenbrough as a main ruck and Will Dawson. Um, yeah. Um, I wouldn't have imagined too many times giving Essendon the win there, but yes, that is fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
However, in like overall football metrics, Essendon are bad and St Kilda
Oh, okay.
are ish. Yeah, they haven't been terrible this season, but as I said, they've not quite got the wins that they've needed to make it a solid season.
It,
But yeah, they just got to put Essendon
it
away.
is a little
Again,
disappointing
this is
that both of the rucks have gone out at the same time because like they actually have looked fairly decent in recent weeks. But this definitely takes a big hit to
I
any
think
sort of structure.
Marshall's definitely been a lot less inept than he was in the start of the season, where he just not inept, out of sync as he did earlier in the season.
Mm.
But yeah, as I said, I think their biggest problem for Essendon's defense is it's bad. And like St Kilda, if they have enough ways to score off a defense, they're gonna get the win most times, and that's why I think that is a pretty safe bet. However, they have had close matches in this time period. St Kilda are almost a coin flip in terms of like whether they win this match convincingly or just randomly lose. Well, it feels like it. You know what I mean? It's like you never put too much faith in St Kilda, but you never rule them out at the same time. Whereas Essendon, as I said, there's what I said earlier. There's just no real improvement signs to make them favorites in any game. Like I don't think I'll tip them for the rest of the year. So
Yeah, it's
I
a
think
bit
that
like
we'll
that.
win a game sometime between the end, but I'm not going to tip them probably
No, I
unless it
probably
was
won't
like
either. It's
extreme circumstances.
Yeah, it's gonna be really tough to kind of really root for them in that regard. But like yeah, on paper, St Kilda should win this.
Yeah.
Let's jump over now to our last game of the round, a Sunday twilight clash between Port Adelaide and North Melbourne over at Adelaide.
Yeah, so it's going to be a bit weird because in recent history, like North had the absolute wood over Port Adelaide when they first got into the competition, won like a lot of the games, and then in recent history, obviously North being a bit terrible, but Port Adelaide were able to get that. I think it's only 2 wins in the last 10 games. However, technically they won the last, so maybe this is the start of a massive North streak. However, on football field standards, with the way that North's forward line is, I think this is the game that they, sort of stop the streak, the far less impressive streak going on at the moment of 3 games. As I said, North have done well against mediocre opposition, and I don't, not counting the chickens before they hatch, I think there's a fair bit of middlingness about Port. They've still got a lot of injuries. As good as the Adelaide win was last week, I don't want to say that that's going to be replicable every week, but I think the biggest thing is the defense. Obviously, in the first one, their defense was let down by the amount of turnovers they had.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's fair to say like that's sort of been patched up in recent times. And while they have had turnovers result in score, it's not nearly as bad. So I do think that Port Adelaide will be able to get the games on their term, not let North get too carried away. But honestly, there's a fair chance that North can do something with their midfield unit. I think Port find it a bit hard to contain. So, whilst I do think that it's still going to be a Port win, I don't want to say it's going to be convincing and North Melbourne are a bunch of rabble and, they're not nearly as good as their win streak suggests. There's every
Yeah,
chance that they beat Port Adelaide in this.
there's definitely avenues for both teams. In this matchup,
Yeah.
like they're both especially after the win in the showdown. I think both teams are sitting in a very similar position, both structurally and
Yeah.
just in terms of form. There's if Nick Larkey can kind of sort out his kicking issues, in front of the
Well,
goals.
say the same about Georgiadis.
Same could be
Might be
said about
behind off.
Georgiadis. That is true. It definitely could make for an interesting shootout.
Yeah.
I think, besides Butters obviously being probably the best midfielder in this matchup, I definitely think that the midfield cores are very similar, and match up fairly consistently. Um,
Actually, I've done my research and Core plays in defense.
you're horrible. um, but no,
uh,
genuinely, I think this could be a 50-50 game. I've definitely swayed probably a little bit more in Port's favor. But I think this is probably one of the more close matchups in terms of like lower on the ladder kind of standings.
yeah. And I'm told if we lose this, we get Dougie Cochran and we'll win every game next year. So
I mean, you're probably going to hit him anyway at this point, so it's fine.
uh,
One interesting,
theoretically, I don't know.
one interesting thing of note about this round specifically is that there is a game being played in every single state and or territory this week, except for the NT. Because there's a game
The
in
NT.
Tassie, there's a game in the ACT, Perth, South Australia, Tassie, Victoria, New South Wales, and Queensland.
Yeah. No,
It's
true.
very rare that this happens. It probably will happen a little bit more commonly once Tassie come into the side,
Mm.
and you might see something around
Yeah.
like Sir Doug Nicholls rounds where games will be played
Well,
up in Darwin or in
assuming Tassie
Cairns.
doesn't have to play their first season in Victoria.
True.
I'm joking, but yeah,
Um,
it's
but yeah, no,
possible.
it's entirely
Build a
possible.
stadium.
We could finally have a season, where like a game is being played in every single state and
Yeah,
territory.
that'd be nice. It would probably happen midway through the season, so
Yeah,
as I
I'd say
said,
like a Sir Doug Nicholls
honestly,
round or something like that, because that's usually when games get played
yeah,
up in Darwin.
exactly.
So
Yeah,
it's
so
pretty cool.
yeah, that would be nice to see.
And there again, it's the end of the bye rounds. There are no more bye rounds. That is every team back on even footing, and I think it's going to be a really really exciting round this week.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, hopefully it's a bit more interesting than last week. But I mean, even then, we've still got matchups like Sydney and Western Bulldogs, Geelong, Brisbane that will decide a lot of the later round ladder. I guess even Port, North Melbourne. Like if North Melbourne lose, you probably officially rule them out of 10 hunting. But as I said, if they win, even they get set up. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, Gold Coast, Collingwood, probably the last roll of the dice for both those teams to be, well, Collingwood to advance, Gold Coast to rebalance, and then obviously Hawthorn and Melbourne would be huge if Melbourne could get another big win, get them up to the upper ends of the ladder.
Yeah, there's definitely every opportunity for some of these teams sitting in like the middle of the pack to start climbing a little bit closer to the top eight, and really, really make that pretty much whole 4th to 10th a lot more interesting. Because the top four is, I wouldn't say it's completely set, but there's more likelihood that it's probably going to be the teams that are currently sitting there at the moment more than anything. So it'll be about the rest of the ladder. The rest of like the finals bracket and how much that is going to change over the next couple of weeks. But that does also bring us to the end of the episode. Thank you all so much for liking, commenting, subscribing, and just coming to hang out with us this week. Are you up to much at all?
Kind of. I'm sort of going to celebrate my aunt's birthday. She's yeah, having a birthday. But anyway, we're going to Fremantle to celebrate that, so that'll be nice. Then other than that, it's a pretty normal weekend. I will be house sitting. You won't see that next week, but it will be the day after. I'll head off there. So yeah, and also my mate's house. He lives nearby there. It's been built. So life's going pretty good because he's my Carlton supporting mate. So
That's very nice.
Carlton are getting rebuilt. His house is being built. Or finished. So maybe this is the Blues years. Maybe this is the fates that 10th has opened up, and Carlton are going to win the premiership from 10th or 9th. Who knows?
Who knows?
But as I said, so it'll be nice. So I'm looking forward to that. But that'll be in a week extra. But yeah, how about yourself?
I'm not up to a huge amount. I wasn't going to make this public knowledge, but I may as well mention it because it's pretty important. I have officially finished working night shifts. I'm still working with the same company, but I'll be transitioning to a day shift, which means I will be able to watch a lot more of the footy again. I'll be able to go to night games again, like
Nice.
without being super tired, which I'm very
Nice.
excited for. The hole in the wall that you can see behind me, that is finally going to get filled in the next couple of weeks. So that'll be great in terms of being able to put like my footy posters and stuff up to have a little bit more of like a colorful background. Um, things are on the up and up. And my work is also relocating. That's why I'm shifting to a day shift. I'm going to be closer to work. So, things are going to be a lot better for me just in terms of my lifestyle as well. And I'm very excited. But I'm also very excited mostly because of the fact that I can watch the footy again because I have missed it. So I've missed it so much.
Yeah, nah, exactly.
Yeah, that brings us to the end. Once again, thank you all so much for coming out with us, and we'll see you all next week for episode 113. So until then, take care.